presented. And before the next witness testifies, what is it that council wish to discuss?
We were going to go through the offered testimony, which appears in three different pieces of the next witness.
Can't quite hear you.
With the assumption that we think we understand now what the people are offering.
All right.
And there are three parts to this, Your Honor. There's the handwritten notes dated 11/21. There's Mr. Anderson's correction, which is page 30. There's the type notes, which are 28 and 29, and then there's the handwritten notes. I keep misplacing together. Of November 27th.
Yes. And let's go through your objections.
Starting with the November 21st notes, page 24, we have no objection to the one part of it.
I don't want to hear about objections, just, or not objections, just those things you do object to.
Okay.
So no objections on 24.
Correct. No,
Right.
they're not offering anything on 25. I would object on, well, yeah, we're gonna get that later. On 26, we're gonna object to the camcorder incident that's fleshed out somewhere else. At the bottom of 26, we're gonna object to Eric received accolades from his peer group. I don't know how the witness would know that, what that's supposed to mean. I would object to characterizing Eric as having a puffed up ego and improper character evidence, even if the witness thinks he was deservedly so.
Well, I'm sure it can be described in a legally permissible fashion. I don't think we have to litigate that prior to the witness testifying.
Page 27. Would object to this portion of it where it was E and L did use some language on parents. Words, they were assertive to parents verbally. We think that's also improper character evidence. And there's no specific incidents in here. I should indicate to the court that the purpose of this hearing isn't just 402 and eliminate, it's also discovery. We have no idea what the witness is talking about here. We've been given no further information from the prosecution, just this statement. We think this statement is improper character evidence, and we don't know what specifics, if any, it's based on.
Well, if he can describe specific incidents, then that can be identified. If he cannot, but he does recall that this happened some time in the past, then that's the way it would be presented. I don't see this as character evidence. It's a description of conduct that would be contrary to other descriptions other witnesses have been providing. So,
When do we get to hear about the incidents upon which this is based? I mean, we're supposed to have discovery of these things, we have nothing.
well, all I have before me is what you have, and there's no requirement that verbatim statements be obtained that have every detail of what a witness is going to say. You have noticed that he is going to describe something along those lines.
Well, we would object. There's been witnesses completely excluded from this trial on the basis that the information is too remote. So we would object to the notion that we're not entitled to know what the witness is talking about and violative of the discovery rules. The people are supposed to give us the witness's statement and not just summaries. And so we're asking if there's any specific incidents that the people have knowledge of that they're withholding from us.
Well, I will inquire of the prosecution whether or not the witness described to you any specific incidents.
No, Your Honor, I asked him if he had ever used, either of the defendants used that kind of language. I don't know how I described it, if it was offensive or vulgar. And he indicated that it was not overly vulgar, but that they did use words like the ones that are listed here. And he was very specific about using the word assertive in describing their conduct. He didn't say aggressive. He picked his word very carefully as being assertive.
This is all in relationship to the parents.
Yes, how they talk to the parents.
All right. Again, there's no requirement that there has to be a specific outline of every word the witness is going to utter on a witness stand before the witness testifies.
Well, there is a requirement under Brady that they reveal exculpatory evidence, and when she just reveals for the first time that the witness said they weren't overly vulgar, that's an exculpatory type of statement that we're entitled to. So I think there is a requirement that we be provided with some context for these conversations which contradict the part that she has chosen to write down.
All right, well, she's just told you that, so let's go on to something else.
Can we return to the paragraph, the preceding one we're concentrating on, which is law Menendez has an objection to the incident concerning Eric Menendez. It's a relevant incident.
Which incident was
This
that?
is the Eric lost patience with his father, even at the break. Eric would look at Jose.
Wasn't that tennis match described before both juries?
It wasn't described by anyone in defense, law Menendez called.
Wasn't it?
We objected to Eric Menendez.
Okay.
So to follow that objection out, we object to this as irrelevant.
Okay, your position is the only time it came out was during the testimony of Eric Menendez before the Eric Menendez jury, and no relative of the defendants testified about that before your jury?
Ms. Abramson is reminding me of
I'm not
Ms.
sure she did.
Andersen. I'm not sure she did.
She spoke very specifically about this incident in front of both. My recollection is she didn't testify in front of a single jury, it was in front of both.
Well, we can certainly check that out rather quickly, if there's some doubt about it.
Ms. Lansing says it was both.
Then I withdraw the objection.
All right.
I, on behalf of Lau Menendez, have an objection to the characterization that Lau Menendez was sensitive about his lost hearing in Jersey. It's been speculation on behalf of the witness.
Right, if it's phrased in that fashion, it would be, there would have to be something more specific in mind than such a description. So, again, many of these things would just relate to how questions are asked and objections made at that time. The answer is non-responsive or speculative or whatever. All right, what else?
Before we get to page 30, which is below the handwritten notes, page 28, Your Honor, we're objecting to the first phrase people are offering, the Calabasas house and living there was going to be the answer to.
All right, that is a speculation or a conclusion on the part of the witness. The entire next paragraph would seem to be or hearsay, other than the fact that Mrs. Menendez was acting as her own contractor. The witness might have first knowledge of that. But as far as the other rest of that, it seems to all be derived from hearsay.
So even that she was acting as a contractor, I don't think he knows except that she told him.
The inference I had was that he came out periodically and observed these things
I don't believe
from
so.
the content of the notes.
Your Honor, is it the court's position then that the people cannot present evidence that Mrs. Menendez told her brother that she was having financial difficulties?
Well, what is the relevance of that? And
Well, it's relevant to explain the camcorder incident. It's also relevant in that it corroborates the information contained on the December 11th tape, in which Lyman Menendez talks about his mother saying that she was cash poor, and it goes to her state of mind as to her son's spending. And I think that for her to say that even if she wasn't in fact financially strapped, she believed she was. And I think that that is a statement of her state of mind, which is relevant to issues in dispute in this case.
Her ultimate state of mind as to whether she was strapped for money, I think, is totally irrelevant. It's the state of mind of the defendants vis-a-vis money theoretically is relevant, and that's not established here at all.
well, there has been on many occasions evidence offered by the defense of the state of mind of Mr. or Mrs. Menendez. The only issue is whether or not this particular information here either corroborates or contradicts the evidence offered by the defense. And
If it corroborates.
that's where I'm at a loss to ascertain where it does.
Well, it corroborates the December 11th tape, which is, although offered by the defense, it is evidence acquired by the prosecution through litigation. And it does corroborate that particular part as to her state of mind. It also ties in with why the camcorder incident, which occurred approximately 2 weeks before, was of significance, because it was her state of mind that they didn't have money to buy, so that the sons could buy things. And
Well, assuming that was her state of mind, what does it prove?
that it was her. She also told Mr. Andersen that she wanted her sons to stop spending money, and that she conveyed that to them. And that proves that it's during the conversation that's handwritten. And also Mr. Menendez indicates, after he finds out about the camcorder, that he's gonna have major discussion with Lyle Menendez about this issue, and I think that goes to some of the financial motivations of the defendants. There's been testimony that Lyle Menendez had free use of a credit card. He had no financial motivation to kill his parents because he could buy anything he wanted, and this certainly shows that he couldn't, and it shows that the parents were concerned about not only his spending, but the family finances.
All right. It could very well show their concern, but again, as was discussed yesterday, how does it show that that was communicated to the defendants?
Well, for one thing, the incident with the camcorder, I have things in quotations wherein,
Let's forget the camcorder for a moment, just in the relationship to this conversation.
all right, well, it's a series of conversations in which she expressed that she was having financial difficulties. And it shows that this was an ongoing problem for her, and that it was not a recent vintage, it was something that had occurred since they had moved to Beverly Hills and were paying the mortgage on the house in Beverly Hills and the expenses of the construction. And it shows that it was her state of mind, that she was strapped for money, which she then conveyed at a later time, 10 days before her death, to her son Eric, and that Mr. Menendez indicated he was going to convey it to her son Lyle. I believe I have.
Convey that they were strapped for money, or convey that something was going to change, or what?
Yes, it conveyed that they wanted their sons to stop spending money. And under statement of intent, I cited three cases to the court, I believe right now those here. It's a people's position, the statement of intent to do an act. People versus one, W9, 69 Calop 3rd 79. And also all called, which is a Supreme Court case, indicates that when a declarant says that they are going to do something, that is circumstantial evidence that they did in fact do that. And I think when Lyle Menendez in the September 17th statement to the police talks about difficulties with the camcorder, that ties this incident up as an issue for the family dealing with money.
But she said that the offer of proof was that statement about being financially strapped what represented Mrs. Menendez's belief that she was financially strapped. That's not properly admissible under the state of mind exception. The exception says statements of belief are not admissible under this exception. And that's all it is. It's a statement by, at most, it's a statement by her saying, I believe I'm financially strapped. So there's still, I think, a hearsay lack of confrontation objection with respect to these statements she seeks to elicit, both with respect to the statements about being financially strapped and with respect to the camcorder incident.
Yeah, with respect to the camcorder incident, for example, Your Honor, there is not what the court is asking about. There is no legitimate admissible evidence that either parent said to the brothers, things are going to change, you're not going to be able to do this, you're not going to be able to do that. All they have is, here is an incident where Lyle has bought a camcorder, Eric has left it on an airplane and is going back to pick it up, and Kitty goes off on Eric. I can't believe you've done this. Not sure what that is, whether it's left it on the plane or bought it. You kids have got to learn. I'm not sure what they're supposed to learn. You kids have got to stop spending money. Well, Eric didn't even spend the money. So if it's anything, it's an example of how Mrs. Menendez blames Eric for things that aren't his fault. But for that purpose, we're not seeking to introduce it. The point is, there's no showing that this ragging about a $900 camcorder that she then chooses to keep rather than send back and to use herself has any relation to motivation for this homicide. And there's nothing in these materials to say the parents said to the boys, I'm cutting off your Princeton $25,000 a year tuition, I'm cutting off the purchase of the $100,000 and some odd condominium. And just to throw in the balance, Your Honor, we are in a position to prove how much money Mrs. Menendez spent during this period from the purchase of the house in October '88 until their death, when she is telling her brother she is desperately poor. I mean, we have every single item of furniture that she bought, including a $40,000 dining room table. So the problem is that this evidence isn't even reliable. Maybe she's lying to her brother.
Your Honor, may I just respond? He says, this section does not make admissible evidence of a statement of memory or belief to prove the fact remembered or believed. And we're not trying to prove that, in fact, they were poor, because I think they weren't. What we're trying to prove is that was her state of mind, that she was extremely concerned about money, that it was a problem for her, it was something she discussed with her brother continuously, and that it was her state of mind that one of the ways to abate this problem was to get her sons to stop spending so much money. And that the camcorder incident is a specific example of this state of mind.
The real problem with this kind of hearsay, Your Honor, is there's no evidence in this case whatsoever that Eric Menendez ever spent any money before these people got on anything. So how do I cross-examine Mrs. Menendez now on what money was Eric spending? And Uncle Brian, I can assure you, has no idea. So to allow this hearsay, and there's no way to cross-examine, and there's no proof Eric's ever spent anything.
All right, anything else from anybody? All right, the court doesn't agree with the prosecution that this is admissible state of mind evidence. The state of mind at issue here is not one that if proved, let me back up. The state of mind that this evidence would prove is not at issue in this case. It hasn't been tied to any activity or action by the parents in relationship to the defendants. The incident with the video camera is relevant and admissible evidence because it relates to some of the activities that occurred a week or two prior to the homicides, and the description of these events have already been provided to the jury by other witnesses, and this just fleshes it out. As far as the specific statement by Mrs. Menendez to Eric Menendez, portions of it may not be relevant to this proceeding, and portions of it may. It depends exactly how it's brought out, but the incident itself regarding the camcorder or the video camera and going to the airport, picking it up, and what use it was made of it afterwards is all admissible.
Your Honor, with respect to the specific statement that I'm
Yes.
concerned about, Mrs. Menendez yelling at Eric, "You kids have got to stop spending money," we're going to object to that as hearsay. If it's not, if her state of mind isn't relevant, if this is simply, all this is being offered for the truth to establish that the kids, including Eric, have been spending money. And that's an improper use of this.
Your Honor, we would offer it under 1240 as a spontaneous statement, as well as 1250. We would also offer it to show the state of mind of the defendant.
How does it show the state of mind of the defendant? He didn't buy this thing. This is ludicrous.
All right, the state of mind would be only reflective of what was said to the defendant and whether or not that had any impact on the defendant's state of mind.
That would be just Eric Menendez.
Yes.
Menendez is not present.
So La Menendez, who buys this thing, it doesn't get admitted as to him. It gets admitted as to Eric Menendez, who had nothing to do with it, on the notion that it somehow influences his state of mind when no one's ever proved he ever bought it. Judge, this doesn't seem fair.
What are you arguing about?
I'm arguing that it shouldn't come in as Eric Menendez.
What?
You kids have got to stop spending.
You're responding specifically to that one sentence, is that it?
Well, I don't think any of it makes any sense, but that particular sentence
The
is.
fact that your client left a $900 camera on an airplane and he and his mother had to go back to pick it up?
That doesn't bother me, that part.
Well, that's part of what we're talking about.
All right, but as I'm saying, I'm talking about you kids have got to stop spending money when he hasn't spent any money, when this is going to be offered to prove he did spend money, and they know he didn't buy this camera. That's what I'm objecting to.
Right.
First of all, he's trying to go back and pick this up even before she knows about it. He's the one who winds up telling her about it.
Yes.
So whether she's ragging on him about leaving it on the
Doing
plane or
what?
not,
What is she doing?
ragging.
What does that mean?
That's an R word for the N word, nagging.
And so you felt that she was nagging, is that right?
Well, he is telling her that he's going to get it, that he has located the camera, that it's been left at the airport. She gets upset. Fine. But blaming him for buying it when she knows he didn't. And how can I cross-examine what she meant by him spending money? Where is there any evidence in this case that he spent money?
All right, what is the people's response then to that one phrase, you kids have got to stop spending?
Your Honor, I think it's relevant to the issues in this case having to do with the relationship between the defendants and their parents regarding money. It's the people's position that part of the motivation for the crime was financial. That Eric Menendez testified that his father had or was going to disinherit him in May of 1989. And by virtue of the fact that Lyle Menendez ultimately did talk to the police about this in September of 1989, it's quite clear that this information was communicated to Lyle Menendez as well. And as to Eric Menendez, it goes to his state of mind that his mother was upset about the expenditure by her sons, not son singular, her sons, plural, expenditures by them, and that she wanted it to stop.
Judge, I think a technical objection here is not only is this hearsay and denies us our right to confrontation, but there's no showing of personal knowledge by Mrs. Menendez, the declarant. And I don't think that people can avoid the personal knowledge requirement simply because it's hearsay.
Well, why is it hearsay? Go back to what is hearsay,
Well,
the definition of hearsay. Why is it hearsay?
I think it's hearsay because it's a statement offered to prove that in fact they were spending money.
Is it offered for that purpose, or
I
to
believe
show
so.
the state of mind of the declarant that this is what she wanted them to do?
It's not offered to show that they were spending money, it's offered to show that it was her belief, it was her state of mind that they were spending money, and that she was upset about it and intended to do something about it.
Well, the intended to do something about it, Your Honor, is pure speculation. There's no statement here that she intends to do anything about it.
No one is, I'm not saying that is proved by this. Does it not, though, reflect her state of mind as to what she thinks should be done, that they should stop spending money?
I think it reflects her belief that
Yes,
they
it's her
were
belief.
spending money, and that's prohibited under 1250.
And that's why it's on, you can't cross-examine on this word, deny confrontation, to prove that her belief is erroneous. It isn't her state of mind that's an issue, it's what she thinks is happening, and it's erroneous, and I can't prove it.
Your Honor, the people are not in a position to cross-examine Mrs. Menendez by what she meant when she told Dr. Summerfield something, or what she meant when, or what Mr. Menendez meant when he told things to the defendants which have been admitted under the state of mind exception throughout the trial, and certainly at times that are a lot more remote than 10 days before the homicide.
Well, I don't know of any rule which says that because the defense had some hearsay admitted properly by the court, some of which wasn't even objected to by the people, that the court should give the prosecution free rein to retaliate with inadmissible hearsay. It's not admissible on the face of it, and our objection is that it is a statement of her belief that they were spending too much money, and it's not admissible under 1250.
Well, it's two things. One is the statement of the declarant's state of mind as to what she wants to have happen in the future. But I agree with the defense that it does also reflect the witness's statement, or the declarant's statement rather, as to what has already occurred. And there's a dichotomy here as to the purpose for which it's being used.
Your Honor, I have no objection to this court giving a limited instruction that this statement is not offered to prove that they in fact have been spending money, and if that would take care of the dichotomy. But I think it is relevant to show that she was upset about this and that she conveyed that to her son.
Well, in light of the court's comments, I think the statement would also be excluded under 352 because it's just too impossible, I think, for the jury to ignore the impermissible purpose here of this evidence and to limit it to a permissible purpose. Not conceding there is a permissible purpose here, but if the court were to try and instruct on that dichotomy, I think it's virtually impossible the jury could understand that distinction. I'm not even sure I understand it.
All right, under section 352 of the evidence code, the court will rule that statement not be admitted. It is incorporating the witnesses for the declarant's belief, and it does prevent the defendants from cross-examining the declarant on the subject, the source of that information.
Well, Your Honor, then I might have to reevaluate whether you should call this witness. Okay. Since it appears that there's very little left that the court.
I've told you you have all of the incident regarding the tennis match, his observations and things of that nature. It's up to you as to what you want to do with the witness.
Your Honor, with respect,
How much time will you need to reevaluate that?
3 minutes?
Well, if you need longer, since it reevaluation that results in his not testifying would alter our schedule here.
Yeah, just a moment.
Sure.
Even that anything having to do with the financial, Mrs. Menendez's state of mind, finances, anything having to do with the camcorder incident inadmissible, is that correct?
No, I told you the incident regarding the video camera was admissible.
Well, then what portion of it, then the only portion that's not admissible is that she had made the statement that you have to stop spending money?
Yeah, because first of all, it doesn't really relate to the video camera itself. The camera had already been purchased, and apparently been purchased by Lyle Menendez. This is a statement made to Eric Menendez.
Well, how about Mr. Menendez's statement that he was gonna have a major discussion with Lyle about the camera? Is that?
I don't know what that means. Do you?
My understanding is it was because of the expenditure.
Well, that's your understanding, but what
I'm
was it?
talking to the witness, Your Honor,
Well, what is it that Mr. Menendez said?
that he was going to have a major discussion with Lyle about buying the video camera.
Well, she left out part, which is he had or was going to have, so it's ambiguous. Is this a conversation that took place or was going to take place? And if so, are the people offering this to show that in fact that conversation did take place to prove something relevant in the case, because there's no showing that the conversation ever took place? So what's the relevance of this?
Your Honor, the showing is that on September the 17th, when Lyle Menendez talks to the police, he mentions to them that there was some problems with the video camera, but after his father realized that something they really needed, he went ahead and acquiesced.
And clearly they did, since they never sent it back. And they, since it was a credit card purchase, and he was assuming they could have gotten a refund.
Well, now we're really speculating.
I know, but you see, the point is none of this really proves anything, Your Honor. That's the problem with it.
Well, I have to believe that the defense position is partly a reflection on the fact that you feel the evidence could hurt the defense, or you wouldn't be pushing so hard.
No.
But that's beside the point. Still, the
I
legal,
can share with
legal,
the camera why I'm objecting, but
Okay.
not in front of the prosecution.
the legal rules still apply as to whether it hurts or helps. All right. Again, what is the people's response as far as whether Mr. Menendez actually communicated this to the defendant? You say there was something on an audio tape in September about it.
Yes, on the September 17th tape, Lyle Menendez has a discussion with Detective Zoller and Detective Lenahan about the fact that there was a problem over the camcorder. And he said, yeah, and I don't have the exact words, but I have a specific recollection that what the gist of it is that, yeah, I would go out and buy things if I needed them. And my father wasn't happy about it, but once he realized he really needed it, then it was all okay.
And what is the evidence as far as Lyle Menendez regarding the purchase of the video camera?
All hearsay, Ron.
What is it that if you were putting this on against Lyle Menendez, how would you establish the video
I would
camera was
ask-
purchased?
Were you present? Well, I was just gonna ask him, were you present when this camcorder was lost? Yes, I was.
Well, one side at a time. Let's just give us your off the top of the head response to everything. Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask him if he was present when the camcorder had to be, when there was a discussion about it, it had to be recovered. Later on, there was some discussion with Mr. Menendez about the purchase, not by Mr. Menendez of the camcorder, and Mr. Menendez's statement that he was had or going to have a major discussion with Lyle about the camcorder. And that would go to show that when Lyle Menendez in September of 1989 discusses it with the police, this is an issue of an expenditure which was not authorized by his father. There's been a lot of testimony that Lyle Menendez had free reign to buy whatever he wanted, and this contradicts that.
I don't have a problem with the fact that you're entitled to contradict that. I just question whether you have the proof of it here.
Judge, the only proof I see in answer to the court's question is the statement, Eric told Brian, I can't believe Lyle did this. This presumably referring to purchasing the camcorder. That statement is hearsay as to Lyle Menendez.
Well, there is a statement in the September 17th tape, which is Lyle Menendez saying he bought the camera, which is offered against him under 1220 of the evidence code. It's an admission by a party offered against him.
All right.
And that is the proof of how it was purchased.
He bought the camera, but is there something in there saying he bought it without authorization?
I said I wasn't gonna use that. I wasn't gonna use the part about the credit card.
No, I mean in the September 17th
Yes,
tape.
yes, he specifically indicates that it was something that he had purchased and that it was not something his parents wanted. He went out and bought it without telling anyone. And when his father found out there were some problems, but his father realized it was something they really needed and he smoothed it out.
Well, how does, assuming that's all correct, how is that disproved by this offer that Mr. Menendez was going to talk to Lyle Menendez
Because
about it?
Mr. Menendez was very upset about it, and that's what Mr. Andersen would say, is that Mr. Menendez was upset about it, and he said he was gonna have a major discussion with Lyle about the issue.
Well, again, how does it come before this jury that he was upset about the purchase of the camera?
Because Mr. Anderson spoke to Mr. Menendez about it.
Okay, that's hearsay. Yes, I was upset about the camera, that's why I'm going to talk to,
Yes, and it's offered under the state of mind exception. Because I think Mr. Menendez's state of mind vis-a-vis his children's spending is relevant to issues in this case.
Well, Judge, if the offer of proof is to be accepted, it doesn't say anything about Jose Menendez being upset. The statement is Jose said he had or was going to have a major discussion with Lyle about this issue. So unless there's another discovery violation here, I don't see anything about Jose Menendez saying to Brian Andersen that he was upset, and in any event, it's still hearsay.
Your Honor, I would represent that every word that Mr. Anderson said, I did not take down under Detective Zoller, nor did the defense take down every word that was said by their witnesses. There were many times when this.
all right,
That's
well,
true.
we're now focusing on whether or not Mr. Anderson describes him as being upset when he made that statement.
It is my understanding that Mr. Menendez was upset. And that's why he was going to have a major discussion with his son.
Judge, the purpose of this document was for the prosecution to make an offer of proof so that we wouldn't have to question the witness about what he heard. And this document was drafted with the idea that the court would have in front of it what the witness was prepared to testify to.
Well, what is it that you're saying, that your witness will say that Mr. Menendez was upset and he said, I'm going to have a conversation, or I did have a conversation with,
He wasn't clear on whether he was going to or he did.
and
That's why I put both of those in my notes. I couldn't recall if it had happened or was going to happen.
what was the discussion going to be about? Just the purchase of that camera, nothing else?
Yes, expenditure of the money to purchase the camera.
And not to change any spending habits or anything else, just to talk about the camera.
Your Honor, I don't know if it went that far with that detail.
You don't know what was that detail?
If Mr. Menendez conveyed to Mr. Anderson whether it was specifically about the camcorder or about the spending habits in general.
Well, I think we should know that before we continue with this discussion.
Can I also clarify the people's offer of proof as to what the September 17th statement said in regard to this? This is questioning by Detective Zoller. Question now, one statement I heard, and I don't know who it was from, you had gone out, bought like a video recorder, a camera. Answer, yeah. And your dad said, gee, that's nice that he could buy something like that. I wonder how he could have paid for it. Answer, yeah, he said that. But question, did he end up paying for it? He ended up paying for it, sure. I mean, it's one of those things where if I knew we needed it and I knew that he thought it was a good idea, he wouldn't buy it himself ever, but I'd buy it. And then, we just discuss it and he'd buy it and he'd pay for it. Where if I came down to it, I could pay for it. So I'm not sure how this statement being offered in any way contradicts this or is relevant to some issue like the case, given what's stated in this transfer.
All right, and I assume that Mr. Kuriyama is going to talk to the witness about this.
Asking him about it.
Okay. All right, what else is there that you want to discuss regarding this witness's testimony?
On the next page, Your Honor, there's this statement, first of all, Kitty Menendez saying Lyle is not doing well at Princeton University, that's pure hearsay. Jose saying Lyle would have to be a doctor, pure hearsay.
Excuse me, what page are we on?
Next page of your
What
notes.
numbers?
22nd, not number, page 2 of the November 22nd handwritten notes. You have that?
Yes.
And then the next thing, Jose said, this is in 1988, Brian Andersen apparently visits his brother-in-law, and Jose is apparently telling him about his clever tax dodges. He's telling him that he had cash flow concerns, so he borrowed money from Live in lieu of salary. Now, in another place in these notes, it's indicated that Mr. Andersen knew that Mr. Menendez deferred salary for tax purposes, and then to have the money that he deferred, he borrowed money from the corporation. Now, I don't see what possible relevance that has. not offered a state of mind, it's simply a historical event, and it seems,
Well, Your Honor, in light of the court's ruling about the, Mrs. Menendez's state of mind 10 days before the homicide, I'm not gonna offer this. And we agree with you. Her particular state of mind 10 days before about their finances 10 days before the homicide's not relevant. Let this in, so I'm not gonna offer it.
Well, it depends on what we're talking about, state of mind. I certainly haven't made any blanket ruling about Mrs. Menendez's state of mind 10 days before the homicide. It clearly is relevant if it relates to issues in this case that the way this has been presented to me, the particular statements that you're offering do not. I'm certainly not ruling that any and all statements that would reflect Mrs. Menendez's state of mind or Mr. Menendez's state of mind would be inadmissible. That's certainly not the ruling here.
The clarification on page 1 of the notes of November 22nd, Mr. Anderson's statement to Mr. Kuriyama that Mr. Menendez was going to get on his son Lyle about his spending.
oh, it's a new state.
And that is a quote, or is that what?
Yes.
Okay, and what is the response by Lyle Menendez?
Well, first of all, now appears we have a collateral impeachment problem with respect to Ms. Bazanich's notes and a statement she took from him in which he indicated that the conversation had already taken place, which she wrote down. So that's one 352 problem. Number two, it's our position it is still hearsay, denying us the right to confirmation. And number three, it's not relevant because it does not in any way impeach the September 17th statement of Lyle Menendez.
All right, the concern again is one that whether it can be tied into the defendant Lyle Menendez's purchase of this video camera. How is it tied in?
Because the video camera, according to Mr. Andersen, was the straw that broke the camel's back. He's just reiterated that to Mr. Kuriyama, and that this was something that prompted the discovery of the purchase of the video camera was what prompted Mr. Menendez to want to talk to Lyle Menendez about the spending. And considering the timeliness in relationship to the homicide, and considering the spending that occurred after the homicide, people's position of this is relevant.
Is the prosecution offering a statement by this witness that his opinion is that it was the straw that broke the camel's back? Because if so,
No, I'm not, because that's an improper opinion on the part of the witness. I'm just merely putting it in context for the court.
Well, is this something that really is described by the witness as a major event or just a casual incident that occurred? And it's hard to visualize exactly what it is that you're proposing.
He has described it to me as the straw that broke the camel's back. So
And
it appears
why does he describe it that way?
because of the way the parents reacted to this. That after all the months and months of being financially strapped, or at least thinking that she was financially strapped, this particular purchase of $900, there had been prior attempts to, or prior statements of intent by Mrs. Menendez to curb the spending of her sons, and that now there was that Eric Menendez tried to secrete it from her, but couldn't get to the airport without her help. Finally had to tell what it was he was going to retrieve. That it upset both the parents greatly because of their efforts to get their sons to stop spending money. That's the best I can do to put in context.
Well, as I understand it, she was upset because the defendant Eric Menendez had left the camera there.
No, Your Honor, she was upset. Well, she was mainly upset because of the camera's purchase.
And the recitation of there were prior conversations where she tried to get her sons to stop spending, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. Mr. Andersen lived 2,000 miles away from his family. There's no evidence of Eric spending for her to have been talking to him about it. So this is just being used for the improper purpose of showing that he was spending all over again. It's just, all this man sees is an incident over a $900 camera. And the bottom line is his sister keeps the camera and goes on to use it over the ensuing week and a half of this tennis tournament. and never says anything about wanting to return it, about getting the money back. It's just ludicrous.
All right, anything else?
Judge, I don't think the court has ruled on the objection about Eric Menendez's statement that can't believe Lyle did this. And it's our position that's hearsay, it's also irrelevant, and absent some foundation as to what this is.
All right, it is vague as to what was being referred to. Do people have any information about that?
I can't believe you've done this.
Yes. No, but Eric Menendez is quoted as saying, I can't believe Lyle did this.
And it says right after this, bought camcorder.
Well, but is that what was said?
That's,
It's not in quotes.
yes, Your Honor, that's what I believe.
Well, that appears to be the writer's interpretation of what's being referred to. But in any event, it's still hearsay. It's a statement by Eric Menendez.
All right,
Not
we've
to prove that Lyle Menendez did this, because this.
All right, we've gone around and around on this one, so what we'll have to do, unfortunately, is have the witness testify, which is not what I wanted to do. We have him testify outside the presence of the jury so we can get it out once and for all so that everyone can hear exactly what he's going to have to say. Is he here?
Yes.
All right, let's put him on and get this straightened out once and for all.
Mr. Anderson, you recall an incident regarding a camcorder where the discovery of the camcorder and the existence of the camcorder and Mrs. Menendez occurred in your kitchen.
I do.
And may I lead, Your Honor, just to,
Well, we would object to leading, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
thank you. Now, this particular conversation had to do with the fact that Eric Menendez had left a camcorder on the airplane when he came to the Chicago area.
That's correct.
And could you explain briefly for us the circumstances surrounding Mrs. Menendez's discovery of the fact that this camcorder had been purchased?
Eric had asked me to use a telephone that morning, private, and I put him in the rec room with a telephone, and he made a series of phone calls, and then the call came back, and then he wanted to take it in the other room. The call was answered in the kitchen, and then he quickly wanted to go into the rec room and take the call, and he obviously piqued Kitty's curiosity, and when he came back into the kitchen, Kitty wanted to know what went on, and he didn't say anything except for the fact that he wanted to use the car. And that discussion went on for a while, and then ultimately he let it be known that there was a camcorder that was left in the overhead baggage compartment of the airplanes. They had it in the baggage claim at the airport, and there was a discussion at that time between Kitty and Eric, and the two of them got in the car and went to the airport to get the camcorder.
Okay, could you tell us what the discussion was after Eric told his mother that he had left a camcorder on the airplane? What was her response to the discovery of this camcorder?
She was quite upset.
Okay, and how did she express that?
She couldn't believe it.
What did she say as best you can recall?
I can't believe you boys continue to do these things, and there's along that line, just
Can you remember anything else she said aside from the thing that you just told us? Any other statements of hers?
Eric insisted that he would just go up and get the camcorder and just let me use the car, and she insisted, no, we'll both go up and get the camcorder.
Okay, did Eric Menendez respond to her in any way about it not, did he say anything about the camcorder specifically, that is whether he had bought it or someone else had it? What did he say to explain to her its existence?
It was purchased by Lyle, not by him, apparently somewhere on the East Coast, I assume New Jersey. And
Now, did Eric specifically say that to his mother after she questioned him about it? That was,
Eric told me that.
okay, now what I want to know then is your observation of the conversation between Kitty Menendez and Eric Menendez after she discovered the existence of the camcorder. So she made some statement, I think you related, about she can't believe you kids continue to do that. What did Eric respond, if anything?
I didn't do it, Lyle did it. Lyle's camcorder, not mine.
Okay, so he said it was Lyle's camcorder, not his? All right, and then did she make any response to that along the same lines of what she said previously, or did she change the topic, or what happened?
The conversation went on for some time about that. She went up and got things ready. She was generally had an upset demeanor about things, and they got in the car and off they went.
Was there more discussion than what you just told us, specifically involving the purchase of the camcorder and its existence?
On that day,
During that particular conversation, you told us about a statement Mrs. Menendez made, you told us about a statement that Eric Menendez made. Were there further statements made dealing with her being upset about this purchase and Eric perhaps explaining it?
no, not. There was a lot of conversation to respond specifically to what was said. She generally was upset about the purchase. Generally disturbed, as I say, about the fact that they had basically gone against their wishes to stop spending money, and the camcorder was apparently purchased on either hers or Jose's Visa card.
Was that conveyed during the conversation in other words, was the information related to Mrs. Menendez in front of you that day that the camcorder had been purchased on the Visa card?
Yes,
Okay, now I believe you've indicated that Eric Menendez had made some comments to you about the camcorder, is that correct?
yes. As Kitty was in the process of getting upset, Eric was close to me at the time, and he said he couldn't believe that his brother did that. That he purchased a camcorder with the Visa card, and he pretty much told me what happened, that he had it hidden in a bag and put it up in the overhead luggage compartment in the airplane and forgot it when he got off the plane,
Right now,
and was impressed that the airline still had it.
at some point after this conversation, did Mr. Menendez have any conversation with you about the camcorder incident?
In Kalamazoo,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, and did Mr. Menendez say anything about what he intended to do or what he had done? Or anything to do with his conveying information to Lau Menendez?
I asked him what happened with the camcorder incident, and he responded that he was going to have a major discussion with Lyle, and this reckless spending had to stop. He had to learn that he has to start supporting himself in life. We're not supporting him forever.
Now, was this in response to your question about the camcorder?
Yes.
All right, thank you, I have nothing further.
All right, let's not make it a major cross-examination here.
No, we'll save that for later. Mr. Anderson, did you have any, was there anything said in the course of the conversation between Eric and his mother about what spending he had been doing?
Leslie, you're talking softly, and I'm getting voices from my right-hand side. I can't quite hear you.
Is someone talking? Okay. During this particular conversation that we're talking about, which I take it is taking place in your kitchen at your home in Downers Grove?
That's correct.
Okay. Is in the course of this, you said that your sister became upset, and she said something to Eric about, I can't believe you boys continue to do these things, that sort of thing. Did she mention any spending that Eric had done?
No.
Now, you said that your sister was indicating, or at least conveyed to you, who knew her, that she was disturbed that they, meaning her sons, had gone against their, meaning the parents, wishes to stop spending money. That was the impression that you got?
That's what she said.
Okay. What money did she claim Eric had been spending?
She made the statement as I gave it to you.
Okay. You didn't have any information, and she didn't convey any information in this conversation about spending by Eric. Would that be a fair statement?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
Mr. Anderson, could you clarify for me who said something about how the camcorder got purchased? Was that Eric's statement or your sister's?
Eric's statement.
And what specifically did he say about how the camcorder got purchased?
That Lyle had purchased it with a Visa card. I don't recall whether it was Jose's or Kitty's or both of theirs. And he couldn't believe that Lyle had done it,
Had done it,
had purchased it.
so he told you that the camcorder had been purchased by either Mr. or Mrs. Menendez's credit card.
That's correct.
That's all I have.
All right, anything else? All right, Mrs. Menendez made the statement, "I can't believe you boys continue to do these things." Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Did you say what these things were that she was referring to?
Spending money was is what she was alluding to, as I understood it.
She didn't say that, though.
She may have said that.
Do you remember that, or you're just inferring that?
I'm inferring that.
Could have been that she was referring to the fact that they were reckless in leaving things on airplanes or negligent in that regard.
No, it was definitely not that, Your Honor.
But she did not say anything about money per se.
She said, yeah, she
For
said money.
spending.
She referred to money.
What did she say?
She referred generally to money. I cannot remember exactly what she said.
The only phrase that you do remember is, "I can't believe you boys continue to do these things." Is that right?
I remember that.
Okay. And what was Mr. Menendez's mood when he told you he was going to have this discussion or conversation with Lyle Menendez?
He was very straightforward, spoke quickly, and was very assertive.
And when was this conversation in relationship to when the video camera was discussed by Mrs. Menendez with Eric Menendez?
After I had flown up to the Kalamazoo tennis match.
All right, refresh my recollection. How many days was that afterwards?
Would have been, I would think, 2 days, if I recall. As I recall, they were there on the 3rd of August. And then it would have been a couple of days after that.
What did you say to Mr. Menendez about the video camera?
I simply asked him what happened with the camcorder incident.
That's how you referred to it?
Yes.
And did he indicate he knew what you were talking about?
Oh, yes.
What did he say?
He said, I'm going to have a major conversation with Lyle, and he is going to have to learn that he's going to have to start providing his own income. We are not going to support him the rest of his life.
All right, and you referred earlier to something about reckless spending. Did he make reference to that
Yes.
in the same conversation?
Yes.
All right, anything else?
No.
Okay, thank you, sir. If you would wait outside again, please. Thank you. Let me inquire if we have all our jurors in the jury room. Okay. All right, does anyone want to add anything to our discussions?
Just indicate to the court it's still our Lyle Menendez's position that Eric Menendez's statements to this witness are still hearsay, and it's in fact unreliable hearsay because we can prove independently that the circumstances under which this recorded work was purchased is not the way that this witness has it in this hearsay statement. But the main objection here is it is still hearsay, as is Mr. Menendez's discussions with this witness.
All right, well, as far as the discussion by Mrs. Menendez, the people's offer was that she made a statement about the defendants having to stop spending. The witness doesn't describe that here in his testimony. He describes a statement, "I can't believe you boys continue to do these things."
And it was his impression that it had to do with money and certainly not about leaving a camcorder on the plane.
Okay,
Because of other things that said that he can't remember verbatim.
okay, well, that would then call for speculation on his part as to what she was referring to. All right, as far as the incident itself, the finding of or discovery that there was a video camera left on an airplane and the witnesses' hearing of Mrs. Menendez's reaction to it as he's described it here, that would seem to be admissible, and describing what occurred at the time, which was in close proximity to the incident in question.
So is he going to be permitted to testify that she said, I can't believe you boys continue to do these things without reference to money?
Well, he didn't say there was reference to money, so if this is his quotation, you can't draw conclusions and speculate as to what she meant. As far as the conversation with the defendant Lyle Menendez, that does indicate an intent on the part of Mr. Menendez to conduct a or have a conversation with the defendant about his reckless spending, and would reflect a state of mind of Mr. Menendez to have such a conversation.
We would object to that coming in against Eric.
All right, let me hear the Lyle Menendez response.
The problem with that, Your Honor, is the statement of September 17th already indicates that such a meeting took place. So how is this relevant? It doesn't contradict in any way the evidence that's before the jury.
Well,
The meeting
it's,
took place, and there's a second part of the statement, which is hearsay, which is, in addition to indicating he had an intent to have a meeting, he also has a second part, which is, these kids have got to learn the spending's got to stop, or however he phrases it. He's phrased it different ways at different times, but that second part of it is the hearsay statement that remains.
well, it's the part of it that reflects what Mr. Menendez said he was going to say to Lyle Menendez, his state of mind and his intent to have that conversation, not just to have a conversation about tennis, but to have a specific conversation about the reckless spending and that the behavior of the defendant would have to change.
But it still reflects Mr. Menendez's belief at the point in time when he's making that statement, his belief that these boys were spending too much money at that point in time, or a boy, one or the other. And I think under 352, the danger here is that the jury will accept it as a statement of his belief and not as a statement of a future intent to have a meeting in which he would make the statement that he says he intends to make. And the danger that the jury will confuse the proper and the improper purpose here, I think, remains under 352 and under the hearsay.
Well, the court would instruct the jury that it would be received only to reflect the state of mind of Mr. Menendez, that he would have such a conversation with the defendant, his intent to have such a conversation with the defendant on that subject, not that reflect that whether or not it was true that there was reckless spending or anything else.
Well, would the court then say that it cannot be used to reflect his belief at that particular point in time that the boys were overspending? And if the court issues such an instruction, how can the jury be expected to follow that? Hearing that statement at face value, how is the court going to ensure that the jury is going to follow an admonition that although in the face of it he is stating his belief that they're overspending, it's not being received for that purpose, but to show that at some point in the future he had a meeting with them? Because the statement, I think the court is inferring an intent here from a much larger statement which deals with Jose Menendez's opinions and beliefs.
Well, as you said, your own client corroborated that there was such a conversation. So the conversation took place, and your client put on in his explanation, put a certain gloss on that conversation as to what was said.
That's correct. And if the people had admissible evidence to contradict that gloss, that would be one thing. But they're using an impermissible hearsay inference to contradict something that Lyle Menendez testified to, which is a belief by Jose Menendez that that Lyle was overspending on the scam recording.
No, a belief.
That's an impermissible purpose.
No, it's being offered to show that he had the conversation, and his purpose in having it was to curtail the spending habits of the defendants, to tell them to change their habits, or this defendant to change his habits.
Still our position that's hearsay denies us a right to confrontation, and that no limiting instruction the court could fashion could possibly direct the jury to make proper use of that statement.
All right, I disagree with that. I think it can be properly limited to the intent of Mr. Menendez to have such a conversation.
We would
And not
object
for
to this
anything else.
coming in front of Eric.
It would only be received as to Lyle Menendez.
Yeah, there's one thing I forgot to tell the defense, and something I'm going to ask Mr. Andersen about. I asked him today at lunch if Mrs. Menendez ever spoke to him about her husband's affair, and he said yes, that Kitty had spoken to him about the infidelity, that's how he referred to it, and that was shortly after she arrived in the Los Angeles area. So, and I'm going to offer that because of the Joan Vandermolen's testimony that she and Kitty were close, and that Kitty never spoke about the infidelity, to show that there was someone with whom she was close that she trusted to talk about that. Because I believe that the defense has said that she was secretive and she didn't tell people her problems, and obviously this contradicts that.
Well, what is he going to say she told him?
That she, I asked him specifically, and he said that she discussed the fact that she had an infidelity problem with her husband.
All right, anything else?
I don't think the court has ruled on the objection to Eric Menendez's hearsay statement to this witness
Oh,
concerning the
that's-
circumstances under which the camera recorder was purchased.
Yeah, that would not be admissible against Lyle Menendez.
Oh, Your Honor, I would whatsoever. I mean, with respect, really, with what respect.
Yes,
Respect to
really, what? I can hear you. Even if I smile, I can still hear you.
Oh, we're supposed to smile.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I'm trying
yeah.
to take advantage of good ruling.
No, go ahead.
Okay. What we now have is that Eric Menendez's mother is upset with him over a camcorder, not because of the spending, because this witness doesn't have that information. For reasons unknown, she's upset with him on August 3rd over leaving a camcorder on an airplane. That just isn't relevant.
Well, you offered all sorts of evidence about that weekend and that week and the 2 weeks. So this is just another piece of information the jury should consider.
We join in that objection that the incident as pared down by the court's rulings is irrelevant.
All right. You want your cake and you want to eat it too is basically the way you're approaching this, but sometimes you can't have it both ways. All right. The court's ruling will stand.
Okay, now the next page, Your Honor, as I indicated, I don't think there was a response to the objection that Kitty said Lyle not doing well at Princeton. Jose said Lyle would have to be a doctor.
I don't see how that's relevant to anything.
I'm not gonna offer the part about the cash
Cash
flow
flow.
problems.
Okay, we're not offering the part about the policy. They're offering that this witness actually saw Kitty hug her son in Louisville. No doubt it was such an outfit.
Okay, let's not editorialize. Let's get to things that you're objecting to.
Okay, now I think this is a repetition here. Eric talked back to both his parents. Is this different than both boys used rude language, or is this something else that we have no discovery of what this is supposed to be?
All right, if it is, you'll find out when the witness testifies. We're not going to do any more discovery during this hearing. Anything
My
else?
understanding is they're not offering the last page.
Yes, could the court instruct the prosecutor to advise the witness as to the limits of the court's ruling so that
Certainly.
he doesn't blurt out the statements the court has ruled inadmissible?
Yes. Anything else?
And not to refer to counsel by their first name.
That's obvious. Anything else?
No.
All
I'm
right,
not
well,
entirely sure I understand the first one, but I'll do my
what
best.
don't you understand so that we can,
The portion of the conversation that he overheard between Mrs. Menendez and Eric, what can come in is Eric telling her about it being on the plane and her saying, I can't believe you've done this. or
That's
something
not what he
like
says she said.
I can't believe you boys continue to do these things. That's what he
Right,
said.
well, that's what he said here, and he said something different to me of the same genre, but slightly different wording.
All right.
So all I can do is tell him.
Right, as long as he doesn't put his own interpretation on it as far as what he thought she was referring to.
And I can't put on the fact that he understood it to be money because it was in the context of money.
Again, he has not described it that way, and he just is a personal opinion.
Well, I didn't take it that way. Your Honor.
Okay, well, I've ruled that way, so you understand it now as to how I'm ruling. So what else don't you understand?
That's it.
Okay. All right, we'll take a recess and we'll resume at 3 o'clock. We'll have both juries in the courtroom at 3 o'clock, and those items that the prosecution is only introducing as to one jury will deal with after the information is presented to both juries as to whatever you're introducing as to both juries.
Well, there's only one thing that I'm going to introduce in front of the Lyman in this jury.
Okay, and everything else will be before both juries, 3 o'clock. Both juries in the courtroom.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Mr. Anderson, you are the brother of Mary Louise Menendez, is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you call her Kitty?
I did.
And in terms of the family chronology, are you the oldest, the middle? What is your place in the Andersen family?
I'm number 3. Kitty was number 4.
And what was the age difference between you and your sister Kitty?
A little over 11 months.
And were you close to your sister?
Very close.
In 1985, did something occur which brought you and your sister closer together?
In 1984, my mother passed away over the Thanksgiving holiday.
Okay. Did that seem to change the affection between you and your sister Kitty?
We were always strong. We became much closer after the death of my mother.
Now, during the course of your adult life, after your sister married, did you ever live in the same suburban area with her? Did you ever live close to her in terms of distance?
She lived in Illinois, in Hinsdale, and I lived in a town called Oak Lawn, I believe, about 5 miles away.
And that was for approximately a year, is that correct?
A year or more, yes,
Did you see her during that period of time?
frequently.
And after she moved back to the East Coast, did you continue to keep in contact with your sister?
Yes, ma'am.
And how did you keep in contact with her after she left the Illinois area?
I visited their homes in the East often and talked on the telephone frequently and made trips occasionally together.
What kind of trips did you make with her?
Ski trips, trips up to Canada fishing,
Did any of these trips include the defendants who are seated here in court?
yes.
And in the last 3 years of her life, when Mrs. Menendez moved to California, did you continue to keep in touch with her?
Yes, ma'am.
Approximately how many times did you visit her in California during those last 3 years?
I believe it was 3.
And in addition to seeing her in California, did you see her in other parts of the United States when she was traveling?
Yes,
In the summer of 1989, did you see your sister in Louisville?
I did.
And could you tell us the circumstances surrounding that particular visit?
Eric was in a tennis tournament in Louisville, and I flew down to be with them and view the match.
Now, when you say you flew down, do you have a pilot's license?
I do.
You also own your own airplane.
That's correct.
Over the years when the defendants were participating in tennis, did you ever use your own airplane to travel to watch tennis tournaments that the defendants were in?
Quite often.
And was that the case when you went to Louisville in the summer of 1989?
That's correct.
And aside from yourself and Eric Menendez, who was playing in the tournament, was your sister there as well?
Yes,
And was her husband, Jose Menendez, there?
yes.
And did you make any observations of how Eric Menendez performed at the Louisville tennis tournament?
Yes,
Now, just to back up before I ask you about that, did you stay for the entire tournament when Eric Menendez was playing, or did you leave at some point before he stopped playing?
in the Louisville match, I
Yes.
left after a couple of days. I
All
did
right.
not stay for the whole match.
All right, and was he continuing to play after you left?
He
To the
was.
best of your knowledge?
He was.
And while you were there, did you see him perform on the tennis court?
I did.
And how did he perform?
He lost the first round. He drew either the first or second match. He lost to a player that was seated, and he was dropped into a consolation round. And he won each of his matches that I viewed in the consolation round.
And did you learn later that he had continued to win while he was in Louisville?
I called my sister daily during the matches to see how he was doing, and he continued to win.
And sometime after the Louisville match, do you remember what month of 1989 it was that you traveled to Louisville to see him?
As I best recall, it was July.
Now, so it's your testimony that you saw him win the first consolation match? Is that correct?
Yes,
All right. And how did his parents react to his winning that consolation match?
very elated,
And how did they express their elation?
with a lot of excitement and jubilation, a lot of backslapping and compliments.
Did you see them express any of this elation or jubilation to their son, Eric Menendez?
Oh, definitely.
And did they ever touch him in relation to their jubilation?
Yes.
And what did you see in that regard, sir?
Kitty hugging Eric and telling him what a great job he did, and the general spirit of excitement.
Mr. Andersen, did you love your sister?
Very deeply.
And was she affectionate with you in the years since your mother's death?
Objection on irrelevant.
Overall,
Very much so.
And how was she affectionate with you, sir?
The same objection on.
be more specific as to what you mean.
Was she verbally affectionate with you when she saw you?
Yes,
Did she hug you?
yes,
Did she tell you she loved you?
always.
I object to this as irrelevant.
Overall. Your answer?
Yes,
And when you saw her in Louisville in the summer of 1989, was she affectionate with you then?
yes,
Now, shortly after the Louisville tournament, did you see your sister again in a state other than California?
after the Louisville
Yes.
in Illinois.
All right. Do you know approximately how long it was after Louisville, when you had left Louisville, until you saw your sister again in Illinois?
Approximately 3 or 4 weeks.
And during that period of time, did you keep in touch with your sister by telephone?
During the match in Louisville, I called every day, and then we spoke occasionally in that same time, yes.
Now, during 1989, before you saw your sister in Louisville, did you keep in contact with her by telephone frequently?
Yes.
And could you describe how often you talked to her during that year?
A number of times. She called me on her car phone frequently.
And when you say frequently, are you talking about per month or per week, or how often? Could you give us an estimate of how often?
Sometimes more than once a day.
All right, so during 1989, then you were in close contact with your sister, is that correct?
Constant contact.
Prior to 1989, had your sister ever expressed to you a problem that she was having with her husband and an affair?
Yes.
Could you describe to us what occurred in that regard?
A phone conversation that I had with Kitty at approximately the time they went to California. She indicated, or she told me she was having an infidelity problem with Jose.
And you indicated that she told you this sometime after she'd moved to California?
Yes,
Now, you have another sister named Joan, is that correct?
that's correct.
What is the age difference between Joan and your sister Kitty?
10 years.
And of all the siblings, there's another brother, Milton, is that correct?
That's correct.
And how much older than Kitty was Milton?
Milton would be 7 years.
All right, so it's Joan is the oldest, and then Milton, and then you, and then 11 months later, your sister Kitty.
That's correct.
Okay. And of the 3 siblings, who was closest to your sister?
I was by far the closest.
Now, in Chicago in the summer of 1989, was that the last time that you saw your sister?
In Chicago in 89?
Yes.
No.
In the summer, pardon me, in the summer in Kalamazoo, was that the last time you saw your sister? After Louisville.
After Louisville, after she was in Chicago, she was in Kalamazoo, and I saw her there in Kalamazoo, and that was the last time.
And this particular trip that we're going to be talking about was the last time that you saw her alive, correct?
In Kalamazoo, that's correct.
All right. Now, why had you gone to Kalamazoo?
I went to Kalamazoo twice.
Okay, could you describe that for us, please?
I went to Kalamazoo when the matches in Kalamazoo were first beginning, and spent a day or two. And then I went back towards the middle of the week.
Now, when you went to Kalamazoo, did you see your sister Kitty there?
Yes,
And did you go to Kalamazoo to watch Eric Menendez play in some sort of tennis tournament?
that's correct.
Do you remember the kind of tennis tournament? Was it a national tennis tournament? It was a local, do you recall?
It was National Juniors, I believe it was called.
And the first time you went to Kalamazoo that summer, was Mr. Menendez there?
Yes,
Was Lyle Menendez there during that time?
no,
I believe you indicated that you left and then you returned. Is that correct?
Kalamazoo, that's correct.
Yes. And I take it when you left, you flew in your plane?
That's correct.
All right. During this period of time that you saw your sister in Kalamazoo, did she return to you at some point, return with you to your home in the Chicago area?
From Kalamazoo?
Yes.
No.
Did she arrive there before going to Kalamazoo?
To my home?
Yes.
Yes,
And when she arrived there, did she arrive with her son, Eric Menendez?
yes,
And was Mr. Menendez, Jose Menendez, with them at this time?
no,
Was there an incident that you recall that occurred in your home regarding a camcorder which had been left on an airplane?
yes.
All right. Could you tell us briefly what occurred with regards to the camcorder?
You object, Councilman Meredith?
Overall,
That means you can answer.
The morning after they arrived, when we got up in the morning, Eric asked to use a telephone privately, and I went up for him in the rec room of the house, and he made some phone calls. And then we were in the kitchen, Kitty was in the kitchen, we were all in the kitchen, and a call came back, and the call that came back was for Eric. And Eric insisted on taking the call back in the rec room. And he took the call back in the rec room, and when he came back to the kitchen, he wanted to use the car. And
Let me just ask you a question. Whose car did he want to use?
the rental car that Kitty had rented.
What happened then?
Kitty interrogated him as to why he wanted to use the car and what the phone call was about. And
Then what happened?
then it came out that
Excuse me, I'm gonna check. It's going to hearsay.
All right, why don't you ask another question?
At that point, did Eric Menendez tell his mother what the topic was of why he wanted to use the car?
yes,
And what did he tell his mother why he wanted to use the car?
Object to this is hearsay as to Lyle Menendez.
Overall,
that Lyle had purchased.
no, let's go into what was
What did Eric say about why he wanted to go back?
objection sustained, the answer stricken.
Okay. Did Eric Menendez tell his mother that he had left a camcorder on the airplane?
That's correct.
All right. And what did he tell her he wanted to do about the camcorder being on the airplane?
They had recovered the camcorder from the airplane. It was in the baggage claim, and he wanted to go up and pick it up.
Did Mrs. Menendez appear to be surprised that her son was in possession of a camcorder?
Objection, Chairman, also speculation.
Sustained.
Okay. Did Mrs. Menendez react to the fact of her son wanting to go to retrieve the camcorder?
She did.
And what did she say in that regard?
She was very upset when she interrogated as to how he got the camcorder. And he told her,
And object at this point.
And-
All right, the next question.
And after he told her how he'd obtained the camcorder, what did she say to him about it?
would you ask the question again?
After Eric Menendez responded to her about the camcorder and how he'd acquired it, what did she say? What was her response to that?
She was upset that
Just what was the word she used?
As best you can recall, sitting here today, 4 years later, what did your sister say?
Kitty was very frustrated, very disturbed. She said,
That's non-responsive.
Sustained, answer stricken.
Okay, Mr. Anderson, I'm not going to ask you to describe her demeanor. I'm going to ask you to describe her words. Tell us the best you can recall what she actually said.
"You kids have got to stop doing these things."
And when she said that, would you describe how she appeared to you? Now, you knew her whole life, correct?
Yes,
Did she appear to be happy when she said that?
she was very disturbed, very unhappy.
And at that point, did Mrs. Menendez and her son Eric leave to go to the airport to recover the camcorder?
They did.
And at some point after they left for the airport, did you actually see this camcorder?
Yes,
And did Mrs. Menendez use the camcorder during the trip that you observed?
yes.
Now, at some point, did Mr. Menendez then join? Okay, let me get the chronology correct. You were in the Chicago area at your home, and this is before your first trip to Kalamazoo, is that correct?
Yes.
And how was it that you and Kitty Menendez and Eric Menendez got to Kalamazoo for the start of the tournament?
Kitty and Eric drove.
And how did you get there?
I flew my plane.
And then you met up with them there, is that correct?
They picked us up at the airport.
All right. Now, when was it in this chronology that Mr. Menendez arrived in the Kalamazoo area?
I don't vividly recall if he arrived there before or after I did. I think he was there before I was there. But that evening he was there,
All right. And that was before the tournament actually began, is that correct?
as I recall.
And then I believe you indicated that you stayed for a couple of days and you left.
That's correct.
And then you returned.
That's correct.
And when you returned, how much time had gone by between your leaving and returning?
2 days, I think.
Did you return home for business reasons or something like that?
Like,
Never mind. I'm going to go on. When you returned the second time to Kalamazoo, did you see Eric Menendez play in any matches?
no,
All right. Was he through playing by that time?
yes,
All right. When you were there for the first trip, did you see Eric Menendez play in any matches?
yes,
And did you see him in a particular match that he lost?
yes.
And could you describe, first of all, were you familiar with Eric Menendez's style of playing tennis?
Somewhat.
How many matches had you seen Eric Menendez play prior to the Kalamazoo tournament in 1989?
I don't remember the number, quite a few.
Would it be more than 10?
I think so.
All right, and did you notice anything about the way he was playing this last match that you saw him play?
He was playing a different style, and he wasn't happy with the result.
Excuse me, I could not hear the rest.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have the answer read back.
Thank you. Could we ask the witness to put a little
Yes,
closer?
if you could move a little closer to the mic, Sean.
Can I get some water too, sir?
I'm sure he was playing a different style and he wasn't happy with the result.
When you say he wasn't happy with the result, who are you referring to?
Eric?
So he appeared to be unhappy with his results?
Yes,
Were you in the stands with Mr. Menendez when this occurred?
I was.
How did Mr. Menendez respond to the way that Eric Menendez was performing in this particular match?
He was trying to get him back into his normal groove.
And what was,
I'm going to object to that as speculation and conclusion as far as the
Overall, the answer will stand.
what particular things did you hear or see Mr. Menendez do in order to achieve this end of getting Eric back into his groove?
Mr. Menendez was giving hand signals
He was giving hand signals?
of various sorts to Eric.
Did you ever see Eric Menendez look in the direction of his father when his father was giving these signals?
Occasionally.
Now, during this particular match, were you aware of whether or not Eric Menendez had a tennis coach with him?
He did not.
All right, and at that particular time, his father, I believe you've indicated, was giving him hand signals. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was there something that occurred during this interchange between Eric Menendez and his father that caught your attention?
objection for the question since speculation.
Overall. You understand that question?
Did you
Could it
see?
be repeated?
Yeah. Did you see any verbal response by Eric Menendez to what his father was doing?
Eric was very frustrated with himself and very frustrated with his father.
And how did he express that frustration?
He was shouting at everyone.
When you say he was shouting at everyone, was this during the match?
Yes,
And at whom was he shouting when you say everyone?
the other player, Jose,
Did you actually see him direct remarks at his father in a loud tone of voice?
oh yes.
All right. And how does his father react to what Eric Menendez did?
Very upset that he was failing to communicate with him.
Okay. And how did
I'm
Mr.
going to object to that as speculation for the witness.
Sustain the answer, strictly.
Specifically, if you recall anything Mr. Menendez said or did to convey his state of mind, could you tell us what he did after Eric Menendez had said something to him?
During the match,
Yes.
he continued to try to get his attention,
And what would he do to continue to try to get Eric Menendez's attention?
to give him hand signals, and Eric at that point did not look at him anymore.
Did Eric lose the match?
Yes,
All right. And was, prior to the match beginning, how was Eric Menendez behaving in terms of his tennis abilities? In other words, did he appear to be proud of himself from how he performed in Louisville, or can you describe that for
What I'm
us?
going to object is calling for speculation and conclusion.
Sustain as to the form of the question.
Okay, could you describe for us, please, how Eric Menendez was behaving when he first got to Kalamazoo after having performed well in Louisville?
I'm going to object to this as well, Your Honor, it's irrelevant. Ask for an offer.
Well, it might well be relevant, but it's unclear as to what you mean by behaving. So objection sustained to the form of the question.
What was Mr. Eric Menendez's confidence level when he began the match in Kalamazoo?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Sustain.
What did you observe in terms of Eric Menendez's state of mind as to his prospects for winning the Kalamazoo tournament after having competed in Louisville?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation. Can't observe someone's state of
Sustained.
mind.
Did you observe Eric Menendez make any comments about how he felt he was going to do in the Kalamazoo match?
yes.
And what did he say in that regard?
He felt very excited about the fact he drew a player that was very low
And
in standing, and he felt he was going to do very well.
and are you referring to the player that he had the match with where his father was giving him the hand signals?
That's correct.
All right. And ultimately, what was the result of that particular match with this player?
He lost.
Okay. And after he lost that match, could you tell us what occurred, please?
Jose went up to talk to Eric, and Eric screamed at him to shut up, and he tried a little further conversation, which didn't go anywhere, and Jose walked away.
Now, when Eric screamed at his father to shut up, did Jose Menendez strike his son?
I never saw that.
Okay, did Mr. Menendez do anything, did Mr. Menendez scream back at him?
No.
Well, you indicated that Mr. Menendez continued to try to speak to his son. Could you tell us in what tone of voice he was continuing to try to speak to his son?
He was trying to rationalize with him.
Objection or calls for speculation.
Sustained. Answer straight.
All right, what kind of things was Mr. Menendez saying to Eric Menendez after Eric Menendez screamed at him?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the form of the question unless she's asking for the
Did-
conversation.
Objection overruled as to,
Okay.
objection sustained, actually. Why don't you ask if he actually heard these things
Did
said?
Mr. Andersen, did you hear the interchange between Eric Menendez and his father after Eric screamed at his father?
Yes.
How far away from them were you standing?
We were walking around. It was at various points of distance. At some point, very close, and
And when you say you were walking around, were you walking in a particular direction or were you just milling around? Or how did that occur?
the match was over. We were walking over to where Eric was packing his bag to leave the court area.
And you overheard the conversation then between Mr. Menendez and Eric Menendez?
Yes.
Could you hear Eric Menendez clearly when he screamed at his father?
Oh, yes.
What did he say to his father?
He just screamed, "Shut up," to him
And his father continued, is that correct?
for maybe one or two more words and then left. He just walked. He said, "I can't.
What did he say?
I can't. If I can't communicate with you, there's no sense talking." And he left.
And when you say he left, did he leave with Eric Menendez or without him?
He walked in front of the group. We all left together.
All right, and ultimately, did you leave the side of the match together with Mr. Menendez and Eric and Mrs. Menendez?
Yes.
Now, during the course of your sister's life, had you ever seen her interact with her sons? Did you ever see her communicating with her sons during the course of her life?
Oh, yes.
Did you ever see her show any affection to her sons?
And I'm going to object as Vegas to time, place, and
Overruled.
son.
Overruled. Your answer?
Yes.
Could you, do you have a specific recollection here today of an incident that you recall where she was affectionate with her sons?
I object and ask for approach
Overruled.
for an offer.
Overruled. Your answer?
In Louisville, when he was winning the matches there.
All right, so she was affectionate with Eric, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you ever see Eric talk back to his parents during the course of his life?
Objection, Vegas to time.
Overruled.
Yes.
How many, do you have a specific incident in mind that you can recall, or is it this a general impression that you have, or can you tell us what that is?
Frequently, it was when they were together.
All right, and did you ever hear Eric Menendez use any kind of language on his mother which contained some minor profanities?
Yes.
All right, what kind of language did you hear Eric Menendez use towards his mother?
I'm going to object again, Vegas to time, place, situation.
Overruled. You can answer your question.
He would use expressions as "goddamn," which was bullshit, things like that.
And that was to his mother, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you ever see him use that kind of language towards his father?
I don't recall.
How about Lyle Menendez? Did you ever see him use any kind of language similar to that with either his mother or his father?
Yes.
And with whom did you see Lyle Menendez use that kind of language?
With both parents.
And was that in a time period within the 3 years prior to their deaths that you saw that kind of language from Lyle Menendez?
I couldn't say that it was exactly within 3 years.
But you have a specific memory that you observed him to use that kind of language on his parents, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, does your family have any relatives in Quito, Ecuador?
Yes.
Could you describe which family members and what their situation is, please?
Cousins from Scandinavia.
And do they have a business in Ecuador?
Yes.
Did your sister ever tell you that she had intentions to go visit your relatives in Quito?
Yes,
And what was your sister's statement as to her intent upon visiting these relatives?
she asked me if I would like to join her and our cousin June.
Your cousin who?
June,
All right, is that another Andersen cousin?
it's an Andersen side cousin that lives in Northern California.
And did you have any idea of when your sister wanted to take a trip to Quito, Ecuador?
They were planning to do it that winter,
By that winter, which winter are you referring to,
the
sir?
winter of 89, 90.
Had you made any commitment as to whether or not you would go with her?
I was unable to.
You were unable?
I was not able to go.
Okay. Now, I believe you indicated that you had visited the family in the East Coast when they lived back there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When Lyle Menendez was approximately 15 or 16 years old, did you begin to notice something about his hairline?
Yes,
And what is it you noticed about his hairline?
he was thinning.
And did you ever mention this to Lyle Menendez?
No,
Did you ever mention it to anybody else?
Kitty and Jose and I talked about it.
All right, and do you remember about what age it was that you first noticed that Lyle Menendez's hairline was thinning?
It was in the summer of 86, as I recall.
All right. Now, the summer of 86 then was the summer that the family moved to California, is that correct?
It was later that year.
All right, so your recollection is that this incident or this first time you noticed it occurred in the summer of 86, but in the East Coast, is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, your sister, did you ever see your sister drink alcohol?
Yes,
Do other members of your family drink alcohol?
yes,
Okay. Did you ever see your sister where you felt that she was drunk?
never.
May I have a moment, please, Your Honor? I think I'm done. I have nothing further of this witness at this time.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Anderson, you have two sons of your own, do you not?
Yes, ma'am.
And one of them, who's known as Alan Andersen, testified in this trial. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Anderson, have you been watching the trial on videotape or on court TV or on cable television?
I've seen one tape of it.
Okay. And have you been, there's been things written about the case as it's been progressing through trial. Have you read any of those things?
A couple of them.
Okay. Now, are you personally a tennis player?
No,
Was your sister a tennis player?
yes,
And did you observe your brother-in-law, Jose Menendez, play tennis?
yes,
Were either of your sons tennis players?
no,
Did you ever study tennis or read tennis books as a consequence of your nephews being involved in the sport?
Would you ask the question again?
Yes, well, both Lyle and Eric were involved with tennis from an early age, to your knowledge, correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever try to bone up on tennis or read about tennis because the nephews were your nephews, which is what they are, were involved with it?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you read about it?
Periodicals.
Okay. And did your brother-in-law, Jose Menendez, hold himself out to you as a great proficient and expert in tennis?
I don't know to that extreme, but yes,
He talked like he knew a lot about it, didn't he?
yes.
Now, you have indicated in your testimony that your mother passed away in 1984.
That's correct.
She passed away, did she not, on your airplane?
That is correct.
And seated opposite your mother when she died was Eric Menendez. Correct?
I don't remember the seating arrangement.
But he was in the back of the plane with his grandmother when she suffered her fatal attack. Do you remember that?
That's correct.
And wasn't it on return from a holiday that she had been spending with the Menendezes that she died?
No,
No, do I have that wrong? Was she on her way there?
no.
She was on her way somewhere for a holiday, was she not?
She was on the plane, yes.
And it was around the holiday season. She was going to visit?
Thanksgiving.
Okay. And did you ever discuss with Eric Menendez what the effect upon him was of having his grandmother pass away right before his eyes?
Your Honor, I would object to this as being beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Did you and your sister ever discuss the effect on her son of what had happened in that airplane in 1984?
Your Honor, I would object to this as being beyond the scope and also your
Sustained.
Well, I'd like to make an offer with respect
All right,
to
let's go on to something else and perhaps you come back to it.
Okay. Now, you've indicated there was a time for approximately a year or a little more than a year when you lived in close proximity to your sister after her marriage,
That's
correct?
correct.
And that was the time that she and Jose and the children lived in Hinsdale, East Hinsdale, actually, correct?
The location is incorrect. The town is correct.
It was not East Hinsdale?
I don't know that there is any such place.
Okay. You know Hinsdale, though.
Yes,
And this was a fairly new housing tract in that area.
yes,
And you at the time lived in Oak Lawn, which is where you grew up.
yes.
And at the time that your sister and her husband lived in Hinsdale, how old was Eric?
I don't know that Eric was born.
Eric was born when they lived in Cedar Grove, if this would refresh your recollection, and they moved to Hinsdale when he was 2 months old. And they lived there until just before his second birthday. Does that refresh your memory? No?
I
So,
remember Lyle running around the house. I don't remember Eric running around.
okay, so you don't remember Eric from Hinsdale at all? Now, where did they live after Hinsdale?
They moved to the East Coast.
Do you know what state?
I believe they moved to upper state New York.
And did you have an opportunity to visit their home there, or did you only start visiting when they moved to New Jersey?
No, I visited them in Muncie, New York.
Excuse me?
I visited them in Muncie, New York.
Muncie, New York. So that's where they moved to?
Yes.
And what year was it that you visited them in Muncie, New York?
I don't remember.
Did your son Alan spend a summer with the family in Muncie? At least
Yes.
one summer? More than one summer, to the best of your recollection?
I don't remember it being more than one. I do remember one.
And do you know if your son Alan spent time with the family when they lived in Hinsdale?
May have, but
Now, you said that you visited the homes in the East often. Were there specific occasions upon which you made those visits, or were they just whenever you could?
whenever I could, and sometimes specific occasions.
Was there any set holidays, for example, when you would always visit their home in the East?
Not that I recall.
Altogether, Mr. Andersen, how many times do you think you visited the home in Muncie, New York?
I don't know.
Were you there when Eric was being taught to ride a bicycle by being pushed down a hill into a cul-de-sac?
Not that I recall.
Now, did you also visit them in other homes besides the one in Muncie?
Yes.
And what other homes did you visit them in while they still lived on the East Coast?
Is there a time frame?
Do you know what years they lived in Muncie?
Not offhand.
Okay. Would it refresh your recollection if I told you that they moved to Muncie in 1972 and remained there until they moved to Princeton Junction in 1977?
If those are the dates, whatever they were.
Okay. And did you visit them when they lived in Princeton Junction on the, I think it's South Mill Road house?
Yes, I did.
And how long did they live at that location?
I think about a year.
And did you visit them when they moved from that house to the house in Pennington?
Yes,
How many times did you visit in the Pennington house?
a few times. I don't remember exactly.
Would it be fair to say you don't have an exact recollection about how many times you visited either in Muncie or in Pennington?
I have it in a pilot log, but I don't have it here
You have it in your pilot's log because you always flew?
most of the time.
Okay.
As I recall, I did.
And when you would you visit with your wife and your children?
Sometimes
Sometimes
not.
would you visit by yourself?
Yes,
When you visited by yourself, would the visits be brief?
what do you mean by brief?
A day or so?
Sometimes,
And when you would visit by yourself, would you stay at your sister's house?
yes,
And when you'd visit with your wife and children, would the family stay at their house?
yes.
And how long would you stay as a family?
It would vary.
From what to what?
A couple of days to maybe 4, 5, 6 days.
Do you have any idea, Mr. Anderson, of what the total number of days are that you ever spent at the home of your sister when she lived on the East Coast?
No,
Do you think it was more than 20?
I don't remember.
Now, did you see, you said that there were trips that you would take together. Was this, would it be fair to say that if you would spend consecutive days with your sister, the most frequent way that you did that was on these vacations? Is that when you actually spent the longest intervals of time with her over the years?
I don't know that that's true, but
Okay. You took ski trips together with her and her family?
yes,
And was it you and your wife and your sons and they and their sons?
yes.
And did you go to various different ski resorts?
Yes,
And how many different ski trips, just roughly, do you think you took?
more than one. I don't remember exactly.
And was your sister an accomplished skier?
She was fairly good.
She was quite athletic, was she not?
Yes,
And you said there were also trips fishing to Canada.
yes,
Now, did your father own some property in Canada?
yes,
A camp, a fishing camp, was it?
yes.
And was it a, strike that. Did Eric and his mother, on more than one occasion, following the Nationals at Kalamazoo on earlier years, earlier than '89, proceed to Canada afterwards for a fishing holiday at your father's place?
Yes,
And would you go with them there or meet them there? One or the other. Would you do that?
one or the other.
Okay. So that was something of a family ritual, if you will, to go from Kalamazoo to Canada for the fishing.
I don't know that a ritual applies, but we would,
A practice.
yes.
Now, how many different junior national tournaments at Kalamazoo did you attend?
I believe the first one was in '85 and then every year after that until '89.
And when you went in '85, was it to see Lyle play?
Yes,
And did you go in '86
yes.
again to see Lyle play?
I believe it would have been Lyle. My best recolletion is it was every August, as I best recall.
Okay. But not August of 1988. Do you recall that was a year that neither of the boys played there? Do you remember Eric had a broken ankle the summer of '88, didn't go to Kalamazoo?
Okay.
Do you remember telling Miss Lansing and me that when we spoke to you on April 28th, 1992, at your business in Illinois, I think you indicated that you did not believe that you went to Kalamazoo in '88. Eric didn't play that year. Do you remember that?
I don't have notes of that. You were going to give me notes of that visit and didn't do that, so I don't have notes of that, so I don't remember that.
Do you think it might refresh your recollection if I show you the notes of that? Right now?
Sure.
Okay. It may not, but does that refresh your recollection concerning going to Kalamazoo to see either or both of your nephews play?
If they didn't play, I didn't go.
Right. Does it refresh your recollection that you didn't go in '88?
If they didn't play, I didn't go.
Now, this particular tournament is for male players of what age? This final round this is the final round of the national tour in Kalamazoo each summer. Is that correct?
I don't know that.
Okay, so you don't know the technical aspect of what tournament it is, but how old are the boys who play in this tournament?
15 through 18, as I recall.
So would it be fair to say that Lyle would have been too old to play in '88? Correct? Because he would have been 20 in '88.
Yes.
So if either were going to play in '88, it would have been Eric. Correct?
Yes.
But if he didn't play, you didn't go. Right?
If he didn't play, I didn't go.
All right. Now, in '87, do you believe you saw Eric play there?
If it wasn't 88, it would have been 87.
Okay. And how many matches did you see Eric play in '87?
I don't recall.
How long does this tournament run in Kalamazoo? Do you know?
The tournament itself, as I recall, it ran over 2 weekends and a week, the weekend between.
So it encompasses 2 weekends and the weekdays in between.
That's as I remember it.
So it's about 9 days, 8 or 9 days. And do the boys play tennis? Are there matches every single day?
There are matches every single day, as I recall.
And do you recall ever attending where you stayed the entire 8 or 9 days?
I don't think that I did.
Now, if a boy doesn't play very well, and let's say he loses in the first match or he loses in the second match, then he gets into the consolation matches. Is that right? The matches with all the other boys who have lost.
That's correct.
And if he loses there, the tournament is over for him, correct?
Unless he's playing in doubles or some other.
Unless he plays, we're just talking about singles play though, correct?
He didn't clarify it, yes.
As far as you know, did Eric or Lyle play doubles at these tournaments, or did they play only the singles part?
They played doubles.
They played doubles? Do you recall seeing Eric play doubles in '87?
I watched doubles matches. I don't know if Eric was in one of the doubles matches in '87.
Okay. So I take it you can't tell me how many separate matches you saw Eric play in '87, right?
That's correct.
And in '87, before the Kalamazoo leg of the tournament, had you gone somewhere else to see his play on the national circuit, such as you did in '89 when you went to Louisville?
I may have. I don't recall.
Okay. Where else had you seen Eric play matches, tennis matches, besides Kalamazoo and Louisville in 89. Let me
Pennsylvania.
strike that because I don't want to mislead you. I'm not going to limit this to 1989. You've told us you saw him play in Louisville in 1989.
Yes,
You saw him play in Kalamazoo in 1989.
yes,
You saw him play once before in Kalamazoo, correct? Either 87, if not 88.
yes.
Where else had you seen Eric play tennis matches?
Pennsylvania.
And when was that?
I can't remember the year.
How old was he?
I can't remember.
Was it when they were still living on the East Coast?
Yes,
How old was Eric when they moved to the West Coast?
I can't remember how old he was.
When's his birthday?
I don't know. I don't remember.
You don't know
I
his
don't remember the year, no.
What year is it?
Hmm?
What year was he born?
Approximately?
If that's the best you know.
64?
64?
63.
Mr. Anderson,
I'm
Eric,
guessing. I'm just asking me to guess. I guessed.
well, no, I asked if you don't know when his birthday is. Do you know how old he is?
We're talking about Eric or Lyle?
Eric.
Oh, I misunderstood. I'm sorry.
Okay. When's Eric's birthday?
I don't know.
I just want to make sure you understood the previous two questions. I had asked you where else you had seen Eric play besides Kalamazoo and Louisville, and you told me Pennsylvania. Is that Eric you were talking about?
I'm quite sure. I watched both boys play there.
Okay, but right now I'm just doing the Eric part, okay?
Okay.
And when you saw Eric play in Pennsylvania, he was still living on the East Coast, correct?
Yes.
And I asked you if you had any idea of how old he was when you saw him play in Pennsylvania. Do
Yes,
you?
you did.
And you don't recall?
No.
So then I asked you how old he was when the family moved to California, and you didn't recall that.
Okay. At that point, I was focusing on Lyle.
Okay, well, let's stay with Eric for a while, okay? When did the family move to California?
In 1986, as I recall.
And how old would Eric have been in 1986?
I would have to guess.
How much time do you think, Mr. Anderson, you actually spent with Eric Menendez before the family moved to California?
I don't know.
And when you were asked by Mrs. Bazanich if you could call up an incident where you saw your sister being affectionate to Eric, you told us about Louisville. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In 1989.
That's correct.
And you don't even remember Eric existing in Hinsdale, is that correct?
A long time ago.
Now, you said you had 3 visits to California after the family moved to California. Is that your best recollection?
That's correct.
Okay. I mean, I don't doubt it. I just wanted to ask you when these 3 visits were.
When they were?
Yes, sir.
The first visit was in January of 1987.
And where was the family living then, the Menendez family?
In a rental home in Calabasas.
Did you notice, by the way, in that house that the entire living room was filled with boxes?
Such as you couldn't get in it.
Such as there was nothing else in it but boxes.
There were boxes in there. I don't know that.
Mr. Anderson, were you familiar with your sister's habit of never throwing anything out, basically? She collected stuff, didn't she?
She may have.
Mr. Anderson, didn't you visit the house in Calabasas where hundreds of boxes of possessions of your sisters and brother-in-laws were stored, and go through them and remove things that were of sentimental value to you?
Objection, Bank.
In 1986 and 87?
In 1990, 91.
Objection, Bank, as to which Calabasas house she's referring to.
Sustained.
Mr. Anderson, after your sister died, did you go to the home that they had been building in Calabasas and go through the garage, which was filled with boxes containing possessions of your sister and her husband?
Yes,
And did you go through those things and remove things with permission that had sentimental value to you?
yes,
And did you notice in looking through those boxes that there were things going back 20 and 30 years?
yes,
And did you notice there were things like old magazines and old recipes and old coupons and old school papers of both the parents and the children?
yes,
And did you see there were also entire boxes of old tennis shoes and tennis rackets?
yes,
And did you see that there were many boxes full of photographs?
what constitutes many?
Well, more than 3?
Probably,
And did you go through those things looking for things of sentimental value that you wish to keep?
yes,
And you removed things, did you
yes,
not? And the custodian of all of these materials was Maria Menendez, was it not?
yes,
And at the time that you were looking through all of these materials, your nephews were in jail, correct?
yes,
Now, going back to the visits to California, you said you visited in January of 1987. Were you by yourself on that visit?
no,
And who came with you?
my father,
Was your father already ill then, in 1987? Was he ill?
he was fine in 87.
Okay. When did he become ill?
When did he die?
No, I know when he died. When was he diagnosed as having cancer?
Well, he had cancer prior to 87, if that was the question, but it
Okay,
was
well,
in remission. He wasn't ill.
okay, but he had cancer.
Yeah.
Was he in that same condition in remission and not ill in 1989, or was he beginning to get sick again?
No, he was fine.
So you and your father came in January of 87?
That's correct.
And how long did you remain in California on that trip?
Just overnight.
And did you stay with your sister?
Yes,
And did you see Eric or Lyle?
Eric.
And was he playing tennis on that one day you were here?
No,
And what was the next time that you came?
later in 87.
Do you recall what time of year? I won't ask you the month, just what time of year?
I would like to suggest it was in the summer months.
Okay. And that same summer, do you recall the summer of 87 being in Canada at your father's fishing camp with Eric and your sister?
If it was 87, yes.
And in fact, do you have photographs from that summer that show you teaching Eric how to bone fish?
How to clean fish?
Clean fish, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you were filleting them, doing more than cleaning them. Do you remember teaching him that summer in
Yes.
Canada?
Mhm.
And how long was Eric and his mother in Canada with you in the summer of '87?
I believe it was 5 days. Could have been more, could have been less.
Okay. And what was the third trip to California? What year was that?
I don't recall.
Do you recall a trip in 1988?
I don't recall if the other trip was in '87 or '88. Could have been in '88.
Okay, so the third trip might have also been in 1987, or it could have been in 1988.
Yes.
And in 1988, do you recall, apart from this possible trip, was there any other time or place when you saw your sister?
Objection vague is the time.
Overall.
Other than the discussions of her being in my house, yes.
Well, was your sister at your house in 1988?
I believe so.
And what was she doing there?
I don't understand the question.
Okay, we're assuming for the sake of just assuming for the moment that Eric did not play in Kalamazoo in '88, and neither, of course, did Lyle, okay? If neither of the boys played in Kalamazoo in '88, would your sister have been at your house that year?
Could have.
Okay. Do you have any specific recollection of your sister being at your house in '88?
Specific? No.
Now, you live in an area called, I won't give the address, but Downers Grove.
That's correct.
And how long have you lived? This is a house you built yourself.
That's correct.
And how long have you lived there?
Since 1979.
And how many times do you think since you've lived in that house has your sister spent at least one night under your roof?
I don't remember.
Has Jose Menendez or had Jose Menendez ever slept at your house?
Yes.
And I believe you've testified that in August of 1989, Eric and his mother slept at your house one night.
As I recall, it was one night.
And in 1987, do you recall if they stayed at your house?
Could have been 2 nights in '89, but anyway, what was the next question?
No, that's okay. It could have been 2 nights in '89.
Could have been.
When did the tournament begin? Do you know?
In '89?
Yeah.
I think they were there either Friday or Saturday. The trip.
Do you remember the date? Because I don't want to go racing for an '89 calendar at the moment. Does the tournament begin on the 1st or on the 2nd? You don't remember.
I don't recall.
Okay. Let me talk to you about that for a moment, though. Did you know in 1989, in August, just before the Kalamazoo tournament, did you know if your sister and Eric were coming from the same place or from different places to get to your house? In fact, to get to Illinois. You don't understand my question?
The question is confusing to me.
All right, let's start with this. Do you know where your sister was, say, 3 days before the start or 2 days before the start of the Kalamazoo tournament?
I seem to recall they came to Chicago from Florida, but I'm not certain about that.
Do you think your sister came from Florida or Eric came from Florida? Both or either?
I don't recall exactly whether they. It seems my memory seems to tell me that Kitty met Eric in Florida and came to Chicago. That's as I best recall it.
Do you know if anyone met Kitty and Eric at the airport in Chicago?
I don't believe so. I believe they rented a car.
If I were to tell you, Mr. Anderson, that witnesses placed your sister in California just before she went to Chicago for the tournament, would that in any way refresh or change your recollection?
As I said, I'm not sure. It could be true.
And if I were to tell you that Eric Menendez has testified that he went to Kalamazoo directly from Florida, and in fact we have a plane ticket that shows that, Would that refresh your recollection?
What you're saying is you didn't stay at my house?
No, I'm saying if I were to tell you that we have documents like plane tickets to show that your sister flew from Los Angeles to Chicago and that Eric flew from Tampa to Chicago and met up there, would that refresh your recollection as to who was coming from where?
Met in Chicago?
Right. Wouldn't though.
As I said, I don't recall.
You've told us about this incident about the camcorder. You got to see the camcorder at some point, did you not?
Yes.
Could you show me with your hands how big it was? I have to go over here because the bench blocks your hands. Show us with your hands how big it was.
Camera about?
Your Honor, could the court make an estimate?
You say about a foot?
It's a guess anyway. A foot is fine.
All right, we both guess a foot.
Thank you.
So it was about a foot long. And when you saw it, did it have a case of some kind, some carrying case of some sort?
Yes, it did.
And when Eric was talking about what all these phone calls had been about, when he was telling his mother that he left a camcorder on the airplane, couldn't you tell from the conversation that she hadn't been on the same airplane with him?
I don't recall that. Thank you.
But you heard him tell his mother that he had a camcorder and he had left it in the overhead compartment above his seat on the airplane, right?
Yes.
And that he had tracked it down and that they were holding it for him in baggage claim.
Yes.
And what airport was it that they were holding it for him?
O'Hare.
And how far was O'Hare Airport from your home?
In miles and time.
Well, both, I guess, miles and time.
Miles, I'm not sure. It's about 30, 35 minutes in time. Depending on traffic, of course.
Okay. Now, is it your testimony that this conversation about the camcorder occurs in the morning?
Yes.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
What time did Eric and his mother arrive at your house the night before?
In the, I don't recall. It was sometime in the afternoon or evening.
Were you home when they got there?
I don't remember.
Do you remember if your son Tim's wife met them at the airport or met either one of them and drove either one of them to your home?
I don't remember that.
Do you know if before coming to your home, whether or not your sister went to Oak Lawn to visit other family members?
Would you ask that question again?
Yes, during the same time period, this August of 1989, do you know whether or not Kitty went to Oak Lawn, which is where you guys grew up, before she came to Downers Grove to your house that day?
She visited Oak Lawn on that trip, whether it was that day or then before she came or after. I think it seemed to me that it was after.
So you think that she visited Oak Lawn after she went to Kalamazoo?
Oh, no.
Okay. So what would
After
it,
she was at my house.
all right. How long did they stay at your house before they went to Kalamazoo?
I believe 2 evenings.
2 evenings. And your wife, Pat, was there at that time, was she not?
Yes.
And do you remember, apart from this trip to the airport, what else was done by either your sister or by Eric while they were staying at your house?
I do not understand that question.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. What time was it in the morning that Kitty and Eric took off for O'Hare Airport to retrieve the camcorder?
It would be a guess.
So you don't remember?
It was middle morning.
And how long after Eric had told his mother that he had left the camera on the airplane was it that they left?
As I best recall, it was within the hour.
Within the hour. And during the course of that hour, did your sister remain disturbed and upset?
She was more uptight after the incident than she was before.
Now, you said that she interrogated him about why he wanted to borrow the car and what the phone call was about. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's when he told her, I left a camcorder on the airplane, but they're holding it for me.
Yes,
And then you said her reaction when he told her that was she was very upset and disturbed, I think you said. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you see her demeanor change? I mean, her physical appearance change
At what point?
when she was upset and disturbed?
Oh, yes.
Did you see her clench her fists and grit her teeth?
I don't recall that.
Did you ever see her do that?
I may have, but I don't recall.
Was that a characteristic look of your sister's when she was upset or frustrated or angry? Clench her fists, grit her teeth.
Just like that?
Well, I don't look like her, but an approximation.
She had many gestures.
Is that no? Or is that maybe? Was that one of her
That's,
gestures?
I'm not understanding the question. I'm trying to answer it.
Okay, when your sister would be angry or upset or frustrated, did you see her from the time she was a teenage girl? Did you see her clench her teeth, her hands, her fists, and shake them? Did you ever see her do that?
I may have.
You see her grit her teeth with tension. Did you ever see her do that?
I may have.
Did you ever hear her raise her voice?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Did you ever hear her raise her voice?
Oh, yes.
Now, you have told us, Mr. Anderson, that among the four of you, the four siblings of your family, you and your sister Kitty were the closest, correct?
That's correct.
And as a consequence, she, I take it, confided in you.
That's correct. I assume that she did.
She confided in you to the extent she'd confide in anyone. Would you say that would be a fair statement?
Subject to cause for speculation.
Sustain.
And you've told us that sometime before 1989, sometime after the move to California, she confided in you that she had an infidelity problem with Jose.
That's correct.
Are those the words that she used?
That's correct.
What else did she tell you about it?
I don't recall. We discussed the incident briefly.
In fact, she didn't tell you anything beyond that, did she?
We discussed the incident.
Did she tell you how long this infidelity problem had gone on?
I don't recall that.
In 1980, did she tell you when she was still living in New Jersey that she had an infidelity problem with Jose and had left the family home to stay in a motel for several nights?
No.
And with respect to what she's telling you, first of all, do you remember how long after the family moved to California she told you about the infidelity problem?
It wasn't long after. I don't remember exactly.
Do you know where the family was living when she told you that?
Would have been Calabasas.
Do you know where they lived before they rented the house in Calabasas?
It seems they were in a hotel or apartment or something. I don't remember.
Did she ever mention to you that she was living at an Oakwood apartment, which was sort of like an apartment hotel type setup, furnished, services, that whole thing?
That is vague to me.
Sounds vaguely familiar?
It's
Or you're
vague
not
to me.
sure? Okay. Did she tell you when she was confiding in you about the infidelity problem, about the arguments and fights she was having with Jose over his having cheated on her for 8 years?
No.
Did she tell you that there was discussion of divorce?
No.
When did your sister tell you that she was in therapy because of the suicidal thoughts that the infidelity problem had caused?
Could you ask the question again?
Yes. When did your sister tell you that she was in psychotherapy because of the depression and the suicidal thoughts that Jose's infidelity problem had caused her?
I can't answer that question.
She never told you, did she?
I can't answer that question
Why?
the way it's asked.
Did she ever tell you she was in therapy?
Yes,
When did she tell you that?
I can't recall.
Did she
But,
tell
and
you?
in therapy, she said, to say that she was in therapy, she said she was seeing a therapist, which I guess would be the equivalent of saying she was in therapy.
When did she tell you that?
In phone conversations, it was not a big deal.
A different phone conversation than the infidelity one?
I believe so.
And who was the therapist?
I don't recall that we discussed that.
And why was she seeing a therapist?
We discussed that as being something that was pretty common in California.
So it was just to be trendy?
Excuse me, Your Honor, can I ask for 5 minutes?
Jeremy, we approach about time and schedule
Yeah, let's,
during this.
anybody who needs a short break, if the jurors want to stay in place, but those who need to take a break, you can do that. And the rest of you can stay put so we can leave for a moment. And then we'll proceed. We'll go until 5 o'clock and then we'll take our break. Tomorrow morning, one juror has a medical appointment, so we'll start at 10 o'clock tomorrow. I'll have the lawyers here at 9 and go over some matters with them. And as far as tomorrow afternoon, I know there's interest in getting out early because of the holiday, and we'll try to accommodate you. I can't tell you exactly when it will be. It won't be at noon probably, but it'll be hopefully before the 5 o'clock time that we've been going here. But we'll work on it so that we can get you out a little early on Thanksgiving Eve.
May I confer with the witness? please?
Sure.
Schedule.
And as far as the time estimates for the trial and when arguments would take place and things of that nature, I've been conferring with the lawyers here, and they've given me some information. And tomorrow morning, I'll get some more from them. And then when you come in tomorrow morning, I'll give you or share with you the information they've given me as to when the evidence phase will be over and when the arguments will begin. And then I'll give you more information about that, the scheduling after that. So it shouldn't be much more than tomorrow morning when you get this information. We'll now proceed with the examination of the witness for their cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. I believe I was asking you, Mr. Anderson, if you ever asked her, since you tell us that, oh, by the way, did you tell Mrs. Bozanich, who has been interviewing you these past few days, that your sister told you she was in therapy?
I don't recall that I did. I don't remember.
You don't remember if you told that to Mrs. Bozanich today or yesterday or the day before?
If she asked me the question, I would have told her. I remember she asked me.
Well, she interviewed you on Sunday, is that correct?
That's correct.
She interviewed you again yesterday, correct?
Yes, she did.
And she talks to you periodically over the course of the day today, correct?
Yes,
And you refused to allow any members from the defense team to be present on Sunday when she interviewed you, is that right?
I refused.
You refused. Isn't that right? Am I misinformed? Mrs. Bozanich told us you refused to have either Mr. Byrd or any of us there.
I had already spoken to you.
You had spoken to me and refused to talk about your sister or the family or how they interact. Did you recall that?
I don't recall that.
You knew we wanted to speak to you on Sunday or at least be present for her interview, didn't you?
It was mentioned to me.
And you refused, correct?
I had already spoken to you.
Well, do you want me to read to the jurors what you were willing to talk to Mrs. Lansing and I about in 1992?
Excuse me, Your Honor, this is beyond scope and cross argument.
Sustained.
You were very concerned, were you not, in 1992, Mr. Anderson, that none of your family's secrets be revealed? Wouldn't you say that's an accurate statement?
Your Honor, that's argumentative and beyond scope.
Sustained.
And you still don't want any of your family's secrets revealed, would that be fair to say?
Your Honor, I
It's still argumentative.
Fact-
Objection sustained.
Now, is it your testimony that Mrs. Bozanich never asked you if you knew if your sister was seeing a therapist? Is that your testimony?
She may have asked.
But you didn't tell her, isn't that true?
Excuse me, Your Honor, I object to this as assuming that's not in evidence.
Overruled.
You understand the question?
No, I'm lost in the question. If you-
All right, well, let me go through a few things. Mrs. Bozanich, in her interviews, first of all, you spoke to her on the telephone about a month and a half ago, and she interviewed you that way as well, correct?
I don't know the time frame. We talked on the telephone.
Okay, and you talked about your sister and her family and various facts that you claim to have personal knowledge of, correct?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, and then you talked to her again and indicated to her, about a week to 10 days ago, that you were now willing to be a witness in this case, correct?
She asked me if I would be a witness, and the answer was yes.
Well, she had been asking you all along if you would, but it was only about a week or 10 days ago that you agreed. Is that correct?
That's true.
And she interviewed you then on Sunday when you came in from Illinois, right?
That's correct.
And she's had these other conversations with you during the course of these past 2 days, correct?
That's correct.
And she asked you, she was trying to find out from you how close you and your sister were, right?
Objection, Your Honor, as being irrelevant, what I was trying to find out.
Sustained. Call for speculation.
She asked you questions to find out how much you knew about what was really going on in your sister's life, didn't she?
Your Honor, again, that would call for speculation.
Sustained.
She asked you if you knew about Jose's affair, right?
Yes.
And you told her that what your sister had told you was she had an infidelity problem with Jose,
That's
right?
correct.
Yes?
That's correct.
She asked you about your sister's drinking. And you told her that your sister drank but never was drunk. Is that
I never
correct?
saw her drunk. That's correct.
Okay. And and do you recall her asking, did you know your sister was in therapy for 3 years?
Your Honor, that seems that's not in evidence. That was asked.
Sustained.
Well, I'm asking, did she ask you?
If she was in therapy for 3 years,
Yes.
I don't recall.
Did she ask you if you knew whether your sister was in therapy at all?
She may have.
You don't remember?
There's a jet lag. We talked about many things. I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember whether or not Mrs. Bozanich asked you if you knew that your sister was taking high dosages of tranquilizers for 2.5 years?
Am I asking if I knew that, or if she asked me if I knew that?
Did she ask you that?
Your Honor, that's irrelevant, what I asked.
Sustained.
Okay. Did you know it?
I don't think I did.
And what about attempts at suicide? Did your sister ever tell you that she had attempted suicide?
No.
Did your sister tell you that she thought about suicide?
No.
Did your sister tell you that she had spent a significant period of time very depressed?
No.
Did she tell you she was a person subject to panic attacks?
Objection, assumes that's not in evidence.
Overruled.
What constitutes a panic attack?
Oh, it's a terminology, but that she knew, but she described it to a doctor. Did she ever describe it to you, that she was a person who had panic attacks?
Excuse me, Your Honor, I assume that's not in evidence.
Sustained. Rephrase the question. It's argumentative. Just ask the
Okay.
question directly.
Did your sister ever use that language with you? Did she ever tell you, I have panic attacks?
She may have, but I don't recall.
Did she ever tell you there were times when she was paralyzed and could not function? Emotionally paralyzed?
Not that I recall.
Did she tell you how she had discovered the infidelity problem?
No.
Did she tell you about going to New York and staking out the woman in question?
Objection assumes facts not known.
Sustained.
Do you know she told other people that she did that, went to New York and searched for the woman in question, took her pictures, talked to her?
Your Honor, that calls for hearsay. Objection.
Sustained.
Well, did she ever tell you anything about going to New York to look for this woman?
No.
Did she ever tell you that her husband hit her?
No.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Now, you said that during 1989. I'll strike that. Let me go back to something. You've got to laugh here when you said you asked your sister why she was seeing a therapist. Did you do that? Did you ask her why?
I don't remember that I asked her.
Okay, she said she was seeing a therapist. You didn't ask her why.
I can't recall the specifics of the conversation.
And she didn't volunteer why. She didn't tell you, I'm seeing a therapist because.
Her phrase was what I gave you.
Her phrase was everybody in California does?
I don't think that's what I said.
Okay, why don't you tell me what she said about a therapist?
It was common in California.
Excuse me?
It was common to do that in California.
She said it's common to do that in California.
Something to that effect.
Okay, and you didn't question her about is it common for people who don't have problems to see a therapist?
Objection argument.
Sustained.
Did you ask her, is it common for people who don't even have problems to see a therapist?
We had conversation about it. I don't remember the specifics of the conversation.
To your knowledge, Mr. Anderson, was she the only person in your family who had gone to see a therapist?
Objection relevancy.
Sustained.
Were you surprised?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
I don't remember my reaction.
And what was the time, the space of time, if you will, between the I'm seeing a therapist conversation and the I have an infidelity problem with Jose conversation?
They were in the same general area.
And did this come up again? Now, you said that this conversation was shortly after they moved to California, correct?
Which conversation?
But, well, the two in the same general area, infidelity problem and seeing a therapist. This is soon after they moved, correct?
The infidelity problem stuck with me more than the therapy did. And I remember the infidelity question coming up shortly after she moved here. The
Okay.
therapy one, I best recall, was in that same general time.
It stuck with you. Did it bother you?
A little.
Did it bother you that this man was cheating on your sister?
Your Honor, at this point, it's irrelevant.
Sustained.
Is it your testimony that you didn't ask your sister anything about this? What's the infidelity problem? What's been going on? What has he done? Nothing?
My sister wanted to tell me, she would have told me. I didn't prod.
Your sister was a very private person, wasn't she, Mr. Anderson?
Again, that's a question I can't answer.
You can't answer whether your sister was a private person?
She told me many things in my life. I don't consider it to be private. What constitutes being private? I guess that's my problem.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out. You said she told you she had an infidelity problem. She gave you no details of it, correct?
I didn't press for him. She didn't give me any.
Okay, and if she had wanted to tell you, she did, but she obviously didn't want to tell you, correct?
Objection calls for conclusion on part of the witness.
Sustained.
You said if she had wanted to tell you, she would have told you, right?
That's correct.
And she didn't tell you, correct?
She didn't go into detail.
She didn't tell you anything more than that she was having an infidelity problem. Isn't that true?
Generally true.
And you were the closest member of her family to her. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did she tell you when she was living on the East Coast that her son Eric had learning disabilities?
We had many conversations about Eric.
Now that, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking whether she told you that he had learning disabilities.
I don't recall.
And you didn't tell her that your son had learning disabilities either, did you?
When I learned, I did.
And you learned when your son was 30 years old and he found out for himself. Isn't that true?
Objection, Your Honor, relevancy.
When your sister talked to you about her infidelity problem, did she discuss it in terms of your family's history of infidelity?
Excuse me, Your Honor, beyond the scope, 352.
Sustained.
Now, before you saw Eric in Louisville in July of 1989, you have that time in mind? How long before that had you last seen Eric?
I don't readily recall.
If he were not in Kalamazoo in 88, is it possible that the last time you saw him was the summer of 87?
I don't think that's true, but it's possible.
Okay. Well, you've talked about trips to California in 87. Is it possible the last time you saw him was on one of those trips to California in 87?
Probably in 87, it would have been Kalamazoo.
So the last time would have been, because that would be August towards the end of the year?
That's correct.
Okay. And you don't specifically recall seeing Eric in 1988, correct?
Specifically, no.
And you don't recall seeing him in 1989 until Louisville. Isn't that true?
That's, as best I recall, that's true.
Now, at Louisville, did you get there at the very beginning of the tournament?
I believe so.
Excuse me?
As I recall, I did.
And how many matches did you see Eric play?
It would be a guess. I think 3, maybe 4.
3 or 4 in 1 or 2 days?
He played 2 in one day, as I recall, 1 in another, as I remember it.
Is that a hard schedule?
For me, yes.
I mean, he was the one playing. Was it hard for him?
I don't.
Pause for speculation.
Sustained.
So you might have seen him in as many as 3 matches.
That's correct,
And and he lost the first one, you said.
as I remember it.
Were you there when he lost?
Yes.
And he lost to a very high-ranked player, is that what you said?
I believe that conversation was Kalamazoo.
So who did he lose to?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was Louisville. And
Okay, so he loses the first round. I mean, he
Yeah.
loses the very first match, right?
that's what I understand.
Well, did you see it?
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Yes,
All right. And he lost playing somebody very good.
as I remember it.
And I take it your sister was very elated and hugged him and kissed him and told him he did a great job losing. Is that right?
I don't recall that.
Winning was rather important to your sister and brother-in-law when it came to the boys in their tennis, wasn't it, Mr. Anderson?
Yes,
It calls for a conclusion.
Overall, the answer will stand.
And they would be quite excited at these big national tournaments when their boys won, wouldn't they?
yes.
But isn't it true that what preceded Eric telling his father to shut up is that his father told him, "You played like an ass"? Isn't that what happened?
Those words?
Those
recall
words, or at least that sentiment.
I don't
You don't know?
recall those words.
Do you recall what words of praise Jose Menendez used when he talked to his son who had lost in front of the world?
I don't recall there were any.
Oh, nothing. So what was Eric saying shut up to? Silence?
Counsel, now you're arguing to the,
You said you heard Eric tell his father to shut up, right?
Yes,
And his father was talking to him before he said that, wasn't he?
yes.
And what his father was saying was, "You played like an ass," or words to that effect, wasn't it?
I don't remember that.
Do you remember what words his father was saying to him?
was asking, interrogating him as to why he did what he did on the court.
Okay, so the kid's lost now in front of everybody, and Jose goes over and interrogates him? Is that what he did?
Yes,
He was angry, wasn't he, Mr. Anderson? Jose Menendez, he was angry that his son hadn't followed his illegal hand signals from the stands.
Your Honor, argumentative.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Now, these hand signals that you've testified to, those are illegal. You're not allowed to do that in these tournaments, are you?
and that's true, but every parent does it.
I see. Well, we've had coaches testify. here that
Counsel, let's not
every
argue
parent
with a
does it.
witness and just ask a question.
In your opinion, as a tenants expert, every parent does it. Is that what you're saying?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Is it your opinion that every parent does it?
I saw it happening frequently when I was in these matches.
Okay. Is that your opinion that every parent does it?
Ask and answer.
He's given his answer.
And would that still be your opinion if I were to tell you that the tennis coaches who testified in this trial said it's illegal and improper and only the over-involved parents do it?
Your Honor, objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Would it change your opinion that every parent does it if I tell you that professional tennis coaches indicate that every parent doesn't do it?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Well, Your Honor, I'm asking if it would change his opinion.
Counsel, let's go on to something else.
Now, you said that Mr. Menendez was making these signals and Eric wouldn't look at him. Is that correct?
Objection, misstates the line.
Overruled.
Is that right?
Do you recall a question?
I recall the question, but again, it's one of those that I can't answer. There were times that he did look at him and times that he didn't look at him.
Well, you said after the break you wouldn't look at him at all,
Counsel, is that a question?
right? That's the question part.
All right, why don't you ask it again so we have one question?
Okay, let me see if I understand. You testified that in the beginning part of the match, Eric would only occasionally look in his father's direction where his father was making the hand signals, correct?
That's correct.
And then after the break, Eric wouldn't look at him at all.
What is it, the question now?
Is that correct? Hand reflection, is that correct?
Did you refine the question? You're losing me if you refine the question. I didn't.
All right. You said that there was part of this match where Eric,
Was this a question? You told me what I said?
well, let's make it simpler. Let's just remember the match, okay? So there was part of the match where Jose was giving these hand signals, and only occasionally Eric looked in his direction. Is that your recollection?
At the beginning of the match?
Right.
Yes.
And then later on in the match, Eric wouldn't look at his father at all.
That's as I recall it.
Okay. And I take it that Mr. Menendez appeared to be unhappy with the fact that Eric wasn't looking at him to receive his signals. Is that true?
That's true.
Now, you said that Eric during this match appeared to be very frustrated with himself as well as with his father.
Yes.
And you say you were familiar with Eric's style of playing. Is that true?
Yes.
And were you familiar with the fact that when Eric was angry and upset with himself, he would shout?
Yes.
And he would shout at himself.
Yes.
And he was doing some of that during this match as well, wasn't he?
Yes.
And you said he was playing in a way that was very different than what you had seen before. Is that right?
It was different, very different. It was different.
Was it strange?
Hmm?
Was it strange? He was doing strange things?
What constitutes a strange thing? Again, it's a question I don't understand.
Well, did you tell Mrs. Bazanich when she interviewed you on November 21st that when the match began, Eric played differently, doing strange things on the court?
He wasn't playing as normal as I observed it. I'm not an expert in tennis. I don't pretend to be an expert in tennis, but he was playing differently than he had played.
Was he doing strange things?
In that context, I guess, in my vernacular, yes.
And did you know why it was that Eric decided to play not his normal game and to do things differently and to do strange things?
Discussion calls for speculation.
Overall.
In my opinion, he was quite puffed from the backslapping he was getting from his parents and from his peer players for his performance in Louisville.
So he was just so conceited that he was frustrated and angry and shouting. Is that right? Is that how puffed people behave, or is that how disturbed kids behave?
Excuse me, I think this is argumentative.
Sustained. Rephrase the question.
He was disturbed that day, wasn't he, Mr. Anderson?
Objection calls for conclusion before the witness.
Sustained.
Do you know what happened in his hotel rooms in Louisville, Mr. Anderson? Were you there?
It's again a question I can't answer. I don't know what you're talking about.
When Eric played at Louisville, did you stay in the same hotel room with him?
Did I stay in the same hotel room? No.
Yes. After he lost that first round at Louisville, do you remember anything about what happened that night?
I don't recall anything specific.
Do you know what was in Eric's mind that summer, what he was hoping for, what he was looking forward to?
Do I know what was in his mind?
Did you ever have a private conversation with him that summer during either of these two tournaments?
I probably had.
You don't remember?
No.
How old was he that summer?
I would guess 15, 16, something like that.
Actually, he was 18.
18.
You don't really know him very well, do you, Mr. Anderson?
Objection as Vegas did very well.
Overall.
Yes, I do.
You do. And you knew very well what was going on in your sister's family. Is that what you want to tell us?
Excuse me, Your Honor, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Was everything just normal and wonderful in your sister's family, Mr. Anderson? Is that what you want to tell us?
Excuse me, Your Honor.
It's still argumentative. Ask a different question.
Think your sister had a normal family?
Your Honor, that's beyond the scope. That's argumentative.
Sustained.
Now, you said Eric was playing differently and he was playing strange, but he was very frustrated. Is that right?
That's correct.
With himself, right?
That's correct.
Angry with himself.
That's correct.
Now, didn't his father go down to near where he was playing during the course of the match?
We were sitting near where he was playing.
How far away from him was his father during the match?
I guess it would depend on what court he was in.
Well, during this one where he's so frustrated and shouting and doing all that.
Well, there were two courts. There was a front court and a back court, and they switched sides. So it was a matter of at what point. You looking for this in feet or in time or?
Yeah, feet.
Feet? I don't recall that from where we were sitting to the beginning of the court. I'm going to guess it was about 20 feet.
Now, you said that during the match he directed some remarks towards his father. Is that what you're saying?
During the match?
During the match, not after, not the shut up.
Yes,
Okay, would you remember what those remarks were?
I do not.
And you remember what remarks his father directed towards him during the match?
I don't know that there were any that were directed towards him during the match.
Mr. Anderson, by the time this match was over, did it appear to you as if Eric had had a good time playing that match?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Did he seem happy?
No,
Did he seem upset?
yes.
So did your sister go over and say, gee, honey, I'm sorry you didn't play well. Don't be so hard on yourself?
To that effect.
Oh, she did. No, she didn't, Mr. Anderson.
Counsel, again, are you testifying or asking questions? Ask your next question, please.
When did you decide to remember that?
Excuse me, Your Honor, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Did you ever tell anybody that your sister said these comforting, consoling words to her son?
If I was asked,
You never asked. Were you asked to describe Eric's words at his father during this match?
Objection vague and irrelevant.
Overruled.
ask the question again, please.
Well, let me ask you this. Were you asked to describe this incident in Kalamazoo, where Eric had the temerity to speak back to his father?
Excuse me, argumentative, Your Honor.
Sustained as to the form of the question.
Were you asked to describe this incident in Kalamazoo?
Yes.
And who asked you to describe it?
Ms. Bozanich?
And you're familiar with how your former wife testified about this incident, aren't you?
Yes.
You watched her testify about it, right?
I saw a videotape.
And she doesn't seem to have seen your sister consoling Eric, does she?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
So, in fact, wasn't it one of your reasons for deciding to be a witness to talk about this incident in Kalamazoo?
Again, you asked, if that's a question, I don't understand it.
When Mrs. Bozanich asked you to describe this incident in Kalamazoo, did you tell her what Kitty did after the match?
I don't remember that she asked me what Kitty did.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you say that what you're now telling us Kitty did, being consoling to Eric, was a sign of affectionate behavior?
She did that.
No, I'm asking you, this particular thing that you're now telling us your sister did in Kalamazoo, would you characterize that as affectionate behavior?
Yes.
Then why, when you were asked by Mrs. Bozanich if you could give an example of your sister's affectionate behavior, did you only mention Louisville when Eric won?
Objection argumentative.
Overruled.
I focused on the elation in Kalamazoo, in Louisville.
The fact is, Mr. Anderson, in that family, losers were never consoled. Isn't that true?
Not true.
Now, after this particular match, Eric spent several hours alone in his room, did he not?
He had his own room.
He spent several hours in it, didn't he? Didn't you see him in there writing in his diary,
Yes.
upset and depressed?
Writing in his diary, wasn't happy with himself.
Wasn't happy with himself.
Excuse me, Your Honor, is that a question?
Does that mean he was depressed?
He wasn't happy. I assume he was depressed.
Did he join the family for dinner later?
That was not usually the tradition
Not when you lost, is that right?
in any event.
But the question is, did he join the family for dinner later?
That question, no.
Were you told that he and Jose had had dinner alone
Yes.
before the rest of you went to dinner?
Yes.
Now, you said that by the way, Mr. Anderson, are you in the real estate development business?
Yes.
And did you ever discuss with your nephew, Eric Menendez, real estate as an investment? I don't mean serious discussion, but just your basic idea that you thought it was a good thing to do.
Yes.
And did you discuss that with him after your sister died?
Yes.
Now, you've testified that,
All right,